warehouses. You wouldn't have children across Africa dying of AIDS right now because their AIDS medication has been cut off. You wouldn't have children in cancer drug trials here in the United States cut off from their life-saving drugs because Elon Musk and Donald Trump shut that program down. You wouldn't have federal workers who thought civil service would save them still have jobs. No, but because they're now on the verge of homelessness. I mean, Donald Trump means it. And for 3 weeks, he's been acting on these words largely with.
In addition to bringing you the Thom Hartmann Program here on Free Speech TV and Video Media Online, we also have a whole set of ways you can interact with us and tools you can use to spread the word about the importance of democracy and the threats to it in our republic. First, there's your daily homework. Sue Nethercutt puts together a daily email newsletter that has a link to every story I discuss on the air, so you can find my sources and you can share them with your friends. It's free and you can sign up at thomhartmann.com. Second, I publish my daily take every day over at the hartmannreport.com website. That's also free if you want the daily 5 days a week rant in your inbox. No ads either. Third, we have the podcasts. There's the free 1-hour version of our daily show that's advertising supported. You can find that wherever you get your podcasts normally. And then there's also the podcast of the entire 3-hour show with no advertisements, and that's available by subscription over at thomhartmann.com. So check them all out at thomhartmann.com and hartmannreport.com.
Foreign troops, declaring that if we cannot liberate ourselves, currently led by Ian Smith and his fascist Rhodesian Front Party. It's important to note that the white settlers were originally given this direct local power as a, quote, self-governing colony of the British government, thereby creating a master-caretaker relationship. During these past 80-odd years, Western imperialism, the multinational corporations of the United States, Britain, and South Africa, has extracted huge profits from the exploited and oppressed Zimbabwean population via the subsidiaries of the Anglo-Americans, Lonrho, Amex, AMAX, Union Carbide, Mobil, ITT, and other corporations. They fully intend to continue doing so as long as they can. The white settler minority has been rewarded for their violent subjugation of the Zimbabwean people with perhaps the highest national standard of living in the world. Sir Roy Welensky, the former Prime Minister of the Central African Federation, which included what is now Rhodesia, once said, This man Smith has an appeal. It's the appeal of an easy life. For $6,000 a year, you can have 5 servants, a swimming pool, and a lot. Beginning during the early 1960s, however, the Zimbabwean nationalist forces under the leadership of the Zimbabwe African National Union, ZANU, evolved the strategy of guerrilla war to liberate their people and land. It is proving to be very successful. There are 20,000 guerrillas in base camps in Tanzania and Mozambique, over 3,000 in Zimbabwe itself, and this number is continually rising. In a meeting between Stephen Solars, a U.S. congressman, and the ZANU guerrilla leaders, they were reported to reject the possibility of enlisting the assistance of Cuban or other foreign troops, declaring that if we cannot liberate ourselves, we do not deserve to be liberated. Despite Western propaganda to the effect that the U.S. and British only wish to avoid a bloodshed in Rhodesia, don't forget the Zimbabweans have been bleeding for almost a century, their real fear is that the liberation struggle will win. With this victory in sight, it is not surprising that the counterattack by the Smith regime has become more vicious and brutal. Actually, this must have been published pre-1980, because this is when Smith was still in power in Rhodesia. More than 250,000 rural Zimbabweans have been forced into concentration camps. Terrorist raids have been conducted against Zimbabwean refugees in Mozambique. Dusk to dawn shoot-on-sight curfews have been instituted and enforced in the border areas. And escalating counterinsurgency attacks have been launched against the military arm of the liberation struggle, the Zimbabwean People's Army, ZIPA. It is crucial for Westerners to understand that the Smith regime has not stood alone in this barbaric campaign. This pamphlet documents the critically important element in U.S. imperialism's support for the Smith regime, white mercenary reinforcements for the fascist Rhodesian, quote, security forces. This flow of U.S. mercenaries to prop up white Rhodesia is an important, though secret, part of U.S. imperialism's strategy for Africa. The U.S. has massive investments in southern Africa. Zimbabwe alone supplies the bulk of high-grade chrome ore used in the U.S. for jet engines and other advanced technological items. Coal, copper, and other minerals are ripped out of Zimbabwe for U.S. industry. Mobil Oil, Texaco, Hertz Rent-A-Cars, Holiday Inns, and many other U.S. corporations operate illegally in Rhodesia through foreign subsidiaries. More important still is South Africa, the fortress of U.S. interests in Africa, where $1.5 billion is invested by GM, IBM, Ford, and other giant multinational corporations. The liberation of Zimbabwe would, for the first time, penetrate the buffer zone of satellite countries protecting the borders of South Africa. South African guerrilla fighters, who are already training by the thousands in camps in Tanzania and Zambia, would have direct access to re-enter their land and accelerate the liberation struggle. Knowing that the stakes are high, U.S. imperialism has worked to strengthen the white supremacist outposts in Africa, although at times this had to be done covertly. In 1970, the Nixon White House approved Henry Kissinger's Operation Tar Baby strategy, based on Option 2 of the Secret National Security Study Memorandum No. 39. This strategy essentially called for covert military assistance, including direct exchanges, so that South African troops could be trained in the U.S. in specialized tactics and weapons.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Not like the brazen giant of Greek fame, with conquering limbs astride from land to land. Here at our sea-washed sunset gates shall stand a mighty woman with a torch, whose flame is the imprisoned lightning, and her name, Mother of Exiles. From her beacon hand glows worldwide welcome. Her mild eyes command the air-bridged harbor, the twin cities frame. Keep, ancient lands, your storied pomp, cries she, with silent lips. Give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to breathe free. The wretched refuse of your teeming shore. Send these, the homeless, tempest-tossed to me. I lift my lamp beside the golden door. This is the Thom Hartmann Program. I'm Jefferson Smith, your favorite substitute teacher. Sitting in, the call-in number here is 202-808-9925, 202-808-9925. What is the role of America? For what do we stand? This nation stands, and for what? What is our purpose? What is our meaning? What is our role in the world? What is our relationship to other nations? What promises do we keep? What alliances do we honor? What is our promise worth? Why does it matter if we have alliances? Why does it matter if we make promises? Why does it matter if we keep them? Why shouldn't we just go it alone? What good does it do the United States of America to have relationships with other nations? Why should we preserve the relationships that we have built? Why does the post-World War II order in the world even matter? Why does NATO matter? Why does the Western Alliance matter? Why does Europe matter? Why does the United States dollar being the global reserve currency matter? Why does it matter if this country can be trusted to do what it says and to keep the promises that it made prior? Why should and why did we think for years that to some degree, at some measure, partisan politics ended at the ocean shore? Why do we honor the golden door to the country? Why does it matter? Well, there's a few things. First, some historical context. I was looking at countries that had won their independence, and I found it, I was in South Africa, and I was thinking a lot about colonialism and the role that Europe played in the development of the modern world, the role the United States has played in the development of the more modern world, and then looking way back. And before being in South Africa, I was in Egypt. And that's really ancient stuff, right? Then you're looking at stuff that's not 200 years old, not 2,000 years old, but 5,000 years old. And made me do, you can't call it a deep dive on world history unless you spend a lifetime at it. But, you know, more than a few hours I dove. And here was something that I noticed. So when do countries celebrate their independence? When did countries win or earn or declare their independence across the world? I went and looked back. I will share this so Sue Stack can share it as well. I'm looking at thoughtco.com, independence birthdays for every country, and it lists the birthdays. And from the before Christian era of BCE up until the 10th century. So let's call that recorded history up to 1,000 years ago. So that's a period of north of 1,000 years, north of 2,000 years. The first record was actually Japan in 660 BCE. There were 6 nations that declared independence and that celebrate now their independence from that period. From that couple 1,000-year period, multiple thousand years potentially, but at least, 1,600, 1,700 years. 6 countries. 500 years, there were 8. Hungary, Portugal, Mongolia, Thailand, Andorra, Switzerland, Monaco, and Spain. Okay, about 500 years, about 8. The next 200 years, about the same number, about 8. The last of those, the last one, now we're up to about not quite 20, about 20, was the United States of America, 1776. So there are, 196 member nations in the UN? About, easy number to remember, about 200 nations in the world that are considered as such, acknowledge themselves as such, about 200. So how many nations do we think had declared independence, celebrated their Independence Day, and tracked back that Independence Day in the last 200 years since we did? I asked a few people that question. I asked my dad, and I asked my wife, asked a couple people, and said, I bet it's a lot. I bet it's like 50. I said, no, it might be as many as 100. And I said, 100 might have been my guess, because I knew it was a lot. 175. It's like basically all of them. Basically every nation, it's a mild exaggeration, but not much of one. Basically every nation in the world has declared its independence from somebody to become the nation that it is now. Of course, the nation state is a more modern invention. But nonetheless, to become independent, you've had to declare that independence from something. And almost all of the countries that exist in the world have declared their independence in the last 200 years. What that means is they've declared it since the United States did. What that means is, or what that reminds us of, is the United States did help start that fire. We are an early adopter. We were part of a really important spark that, because before us it was Nepal, before that us it was 1719 Liechtenstein, right? That Liechtenstein's independence did not spur the world into action. Apologies to my friends in Liechtenstein. But Rousseau and John Rawls later, and Hobbes and Locke, and the French, and the United States started thinking about what do we mean by freedom? What do we mean by self-governance? What does it mean to have a social contract? What should a nation state do and be? Should it still have kings? And with that spark, with that shining light that was heard around the world, seen around the world, maybe it's the gunshots that were heard around the world. Nearly every country in the world has guarded its independence since then. That's who we're supposed to be on the side of. What the United States is supposed to stand for, to love our country, the redemption story that is the United States of America, to value it, to truly love America. The idea that you're loving includes the idea of self-governance, includes the idea of independence, includes fighting against oppression. And the most stark, the most obvious, the easiest to define form of oppression is when a big foreign armed bully comes and kills your people to steal your stuff, take your land, murder your citizens, and try to gain and wield power. That is the starkest, most obvious form of oppression. That maybe then tied with slavery. And it took our nation about 80 years to start coming to grips with that. We're still coming to grips with the fallout of it as southern states help foment a set of ideas that have now southernified the Republican Party and a bunch of the country. We haven't fully dealt with that. But that's the side we're supposed to be on. We're supposed to be on the side of independence, of freedom, of bending the arc of history towards justice. That's the side we're supposed to be on. So then there's a country, I don't know, let's say like Ukraine, speaking not so hypothetically,
2 minutes,
that has one of the biggest bullies with the biggest intelligence apparatus in the world, one of the biggest militaries in the world, that is still wanting to act like a colonial power, who didn't quite get the joke or felt the joke was on them of 30 years ago, 40 years ago, 60 years ago, as more and more countries were declaring independence from Great Britain and then from Russia, from the Soviet Union. If a country like that gets invaded, we're supposed to be on their side. Now, there are tangible reasons for this, and we will talk about some of the tangible reasons for this today. We care about the dollar being the global reserve currency. We care about our promises being kept and other people being able to trust us. It garners huge benefits for everybody who lives in the United States, whether we recognize it or not. But even if you just go to a level of values, of what we stand for, this country is supposed to stand for that country that's getting picked on, rather than siding with the country that's picking on them. That what happened in the Oval Office last week wasn't anti-Ukrainian, and it wasn't merely pro-Russian. It was those things. But most importantly, at the most fundamental level, it was anti-American. It was un-American. It was contra what we're supposed to stand for, the good part. the reason we're worth rooting for, the reason Rambo gets to be a good guy, is because we're supposed to be on the side, not of the bully, but of the bullied. We don't always live up to that promise. And last week in the Oval Office, this country failed deeply to live up to that promise. We'll talk more about that. Right now, what I want to say is thank you very much. This is the Thom Hartmann Show. We'll have your calls, 202-808-9925. We'll head to break. It is an honor to be with you. I'm Jeff Smith. This is your show. We'll be right back.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
What's Sue's last name? The Thom Hartmann Show, 202-808-9925. Brandon from San Antonio, from San Jose, you are on the air.
Hi, Jeff. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, you might have cut out just a tiny bit, but I think we're all right. Keep going.
How about now?
Keep trying. The funny thing about our communication habits is that we and a TV ad made it somewhat popular. We say, "Can you hear me now?" And then we stop talking, and then we don't know because we might have heard now. But keep going. We'll do our best.
Exactly. Okay. So what I called about is the whole Zelensky meeting. With JD Vance and Trump. I'm pretty I was pretty livid when I saw that. But I was kind of encouraged to the level of poise and how patient Zelensky was about that whole meeting. It was really gave me pause for Ukraine.
You're cutting out a little bit. I don't know if that's on our end or on yours. Let's put you back on hold. Let's give it a shot. See if we can get you. See if we can get you clean coming through. Let's go to Michael from the Bronx. You're on the air. Michael, go ahead.
Hi, Jeff. All right, and I did hear that previous call was kind of choppy, so I'm witness to that. I'm calling about a few things. Number one, the fallout. That was the most despicable and toxic environment I have ever witnessed in my almost 58 years of living. All right? I don't know what the hell fans of Trump think they are to be talking and berating down Mr. Zelensky, who is the victim in this, not the aggressor. So that debunks the lie of Zelensky starting the war and so forth. But and then having the audacity to tell the league like it's your house. It's not your house, Trump. It's not your house, Vance. As the people's house, that's the White House. You are currently the occupant of the house, the most undeservingly, I may add. Yeah. I know there's more to follow up on that. But as far as Marjorie Taylor Greene, and I have relatives in the federal workers, and she says that federal workers don't deserve a paycheck. Excuse me, Ms. Green, what the hell are you? You're a federal worker as well. But if you want to play that game, then I go and judge on the merits. And we have federal workers that do the work and those like you that do not. And I can say that you, Ms. Green, there's a consensus that say you're bleach, blonde, bad, built, butch body, deserve a damn paycheck.
Well, I hear what you're saying. I heard a couple things. Thank you so much for the call, Michael. I heard a couple things. First thing I heard was fallout from what's happening in the White House. I want to say something about that. And the second, let me take three things I heard. Second was this idea of whose house is it? To whom does the president and to whom does the vice president owe a duty? And is that their house? Is that the people's house? And if it's the people's house, then what does that mean? What does that translate to? What consequences does that have? And then third, about the disrespect for the federal workers. that are getting canned, getting disrespected, getting disregarded. There's been meaningful fallout. My biggest concern, and I'm jumping several moves ahead, but I am trying to think 10 years out, not only 10 weeks out. I do think the big fight, one of the big bummers of all this is part of an attack on America. And not just an attack on liberals, an attack on America. We'll be back.
Missed my opening rant today? It's usually published over at HartmannReport.com, where you can read it and share it with your friends for free. Check it out, HartmannReport.com. Back in 2010, when Viktor Orban took over the Fidesz party in Hungary, that party was sort of like the Republican Party. It was just a conventional conservative European political party. And he has turned it into a neo-fascist powerhouse. He pushed through he altered the nation's constitution to push through what we would call gerrymandering and voter suppression so that his party will always win. He campaigned on building a wall. Build a wall was literally one of his campaign slogans, and he did build a wall across the southern border of Hungary to keep out Syrian refugees who were fleeing the violence when Russia was bombing that country. His other two campaign slogans were, and I quote, "Restore Christian purity and make Hungary great again." Seriously, back in 2010, 6 years before Trump. There's an amazing backstory about how Viktor Orban is being cloned, essentially, in the GOP. You can find the article over at HartmannReport.com. Check it out.
Welcome back, everybody. Let's go to your calls. Let's go to Patricia in North Bend, Washington. Go ahead, Patricia.
Hi, Jefferson. It's good to talk with you today.
Likewise.
I'm calling to say I'm mad as hell, and I'm not going to take it anymore.
Good.
And I think there are so many Americans who feel the same way I do. So I just finished calling Chuck Schumer and Hakeem Jeffries and my own members of Congress, and I told them that I want the Democrats to boycott the joint session of Congress tomorrow. I would love to see every single Democrat standing outside with a sign, and they would have lots of microphones and the news organizations, and they can say they're not going to go sit in that chamber and listen to Donald Trump lie.
I appreciate the call, and I empathize.
One more thing, though.
Go ahead.
I want everybody to call Congress and tell them what they want their Democrats to do tomorrow.
Yeah.
Because playing nice is not going to work. My husband said he thought it would be really cool if they all took whistles in there, and every time he lied, they would whistle. So there's plenty of things they can do, but sitting in there and playing nice is not going to solve this issue. It's not going to change anything. The American people want to see the Dems standing up and fighting. We need to figure out how to make it obvious.
Patricia, you have raised, I think, a hugely important topic for today, which is what is the best sort of strategic pathway for Democrats to stand up and be in a position to push against the encroachments, both domestic and international, by this now kind of monotheistic, monoculture administration. And I want to dig into it because there's a couple schools.
Opinion?
Okay, go ahead. Last word for you, Patricia, and then I'll say something.
What should they do tomorrow?
What I'll say is what I think we should do. What I'm going to do right after the break is talk about, there's two schools of thought. Because one school of thought is let the Republicans hang themselves. And there's real risk with that. The other school of thought is yours, it's shared by a bunch of people. James Carville is the one who says, let them hang themselves. Don't make yourself an even easier target. Be wary of the Reichstag fire. I want to talk about that after this.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
But the quick answer, it's not what they do, it's what we do. We can show resistance. We'll be back.
Decadent Society, How We Became the Victims of Our Own Success by Russ Douthat, a New York Times columnist. And this is from, it's about the middle of his first chapter. This is a subchapter titled The Limits of Neoliberalism. There's no shortage of theories to explain this great stagnation, to borrow a phrase from one of the theorizers, the George Mason University economist Tyler Cowen. And there's also no need to simply choose between them. Like most broad trends, the economic decadence of the developed world is overdetermined, and almost every serious attempt at explanation will contain some element of truth. The most politically appealing theories, the ones animating our populist and socialist insurgencies, tend to blame neoliberalism itself, claiming that the medicine for 1970s stagflation has proven to be poisonous in large doses. The push for ever freer trade has hollowed out Western economies, the argument goes, offshoring productive industries and killing decent jobs, making financiers and knowledge workers rich while the middle class shrinks steadily. Meanwhile, low tax rates intended to spur investment have enabled the rich to keep more of their gains while starving the programs required to protect the poor and boost the working classes. Antitrust policy has become so fixated on the so-called benefits of consolidation, lower prices for consumers, that it has ignored all the ways that market-dominant corporations can warp policies and strangle innovation. And anti-inflationary policies, forged to counteract a crisis that's now generations behind us, have been adopted as a dogma that's now by the West's financial and political elite, which demands fiscal austerity under every circumstance and deprives struggling economies of the cash they need to grow. You don't have to accept every aspect of this argument, and indeed the populists of the left and right disagree about which aspects to stress, to see that it describes a real phenomenon, not the outright failure of neoliberalism, but diminishing returns from some of its preferred policies, and an overconfidence among the Western leadership class that solutions from the 1970s are permanently applicable. On trade, for instance, the general principle that open markets have more winners than losers led policymakers to assume that this would necessarily happen, and to overestimate how quickly communities affected by outsourcing would recover and how swiftly other sectors of the economy could compensate. In particular, the Massachusetts Institute of Technology economist David Autor has argued persuasively that the China shock, the dramatic offshoring that followed Beijing's entrance into the World Trade Organization in 2001, inflicted more economic damage on working-class communities in the United States than many experts anticipated, without generating the compensating growth and job creation expected elsewhere. This is not a knockdown case against free trade, just a case against overconfidence in its incautious application. And the same argument applies to other features of the neoliberal program. It's quite possible that lower tax rates spur growth and innovation when tax rates are cut from 70% highs, but also that a program of permanent upper bracket tax cutting, as practiced by America's Republican Party, won't produce the hoped-for spillover effects among the bottom 95%. It's possible that the initial economic insight that some corporate consolidation could be good for consumers was useful for antitrust decision-making in the 1970s and 80s, but needs to be corrected as monopolies regather. It's possible that a program of deficit reduction and tight money that makes sense when inflation is galloping doesn't make sense when we're closer to deflation. The countries sometimes need a loose monetary policy to fight stagnation, and having a financial overclass too fixated on the perils of a for-now imaginary inflation is a recipe for permanently lower growth. Then, alongside this brief against an overextended neoliberalism, there's a more subtle argument, pushed by the more serious sort. I think I skipped a page here. Sort of liberalism that the neoliberal program hasn't so much pushed too far as pushed in the wrong direction. In this argument, we don't need less deregulation, but a different kind than we have, because incumbents and insiders in the West have captured the sprawling regulatory state and used it to freeze out potential competition. The age of stagnation, according to this theory, is the fruit of what Brink Lindsay of the Niskansen Institute and Stephen Tellez of Johns Hopkins University describe as a captured economy, in which everything from land use rules to exclusionary zoning to occupational licensing to ever-expanding intellectual property protections to corporate subsidies and tax breaks all converge to create a system that's basically the worst of socialism and the worst of capitalism conjoined. Plutocratic and sclerotic, overregulated and undertaxed, with an upper class enriching itself off rents rather than innovation, and a service class that can't advance beyond its station. The overlap between this more libertarian argument and the left-wing critique of neoliberalism is apparent in one of the texts of the post-financial crisis left, French economist Thomas Piketty's 2013 tome Capital in the 21st Century, which mined centuries worth of statistics to argue that capitalism inherently makes the rich richer because returns on capital will always be higher than simple economic growth unless some powerful force intervenes. The forces that intervened in the 20th century were the Great Depression and two world wars, which not only provided the impetus for massive government interventions, but destroyed outright a great deal of capitalist wealth. The book is The Decadent Society by Russ Douthat.
Did you know that every weekday we send out an email before the show giving you all the topics coming up so you can be fully informed and ready to interact with our program? Or that after the show we send out Sue's Stack, a list of every topic I've discussed along with clickable hot links to every source of information I've shared with you on the air? It's all completely free and available over at thom.tv, THOM.tv. Check it out.
And we're back. So, we're talking about the United States' role in the world and why it matters. Get to your calls in a moment. We are also, thanks in part to a smart caller, I do want to talk today about the smartest pathways for resistance. And I'm going to offer, probably a little later in the show and focus on even more this week, I'm going to offer a somewhat oddball view of where I think the smartest energy can go. It's not going to maybe be where you think. Some of you may disagree, and that's fine. But as I've been turning this over in my brain, not only over the weekend, but over the past 10 plus years, getting on to 20 years. Oh my goodness, 22 years? That's all right. I'm getting older. That I've been processing what I think are the smarter strategic actions and therefore smartest strategic responses. And they might seem not as intuitive. But setting that aside for a moment, there are a couple schools of thought. One school of thought is that Democrats, and that very often people say, Democrats should blank, Democrats should blank, storm out or boycott or whatever. And there's boycottable conduct. What is happening right now to federal workers, what is happening right now domestically and internationally, and heck, all for the price of eggs, which is going up, not down, it was always a lie, is abhorrent, it is bad, it is anti-American, it is harm the United States of America, and it is all propped up by a media apparatus and a propaganda network unlike this country has ever seen. And in some respects, unlike the world has ever seen. So these schools of thought are one, sort of the boycott school of thought, and the other school of thought, which aren't exactly, they're opposed, but they're not 180 degrees opposed. I don't want to just be a fight promoter, but is the James Carville view, who said, listen, it's done. Donald Trump is doing dumb stuff. He's going to pay the price of the ballot box. All we have to do is not trip over ourselves. His advice to Democrats is not get at, and he mentioned a particular, liberal member of the Senate and said, the last thing we need is some liberal member of the Senate going out there and doing blank, give an easier target for the right wing. Just point at the conduct that is happening and let people watch that. And I think there's wisdom in both views. Before I go further, I want to make sure we take your call, because I think Bob wants to take one of the views, which is legitimate. Bob from Sandy, you are on the air.
Yeah, you just kind of addressed one of my ideas, and I'm not the first one to have it.
Sure.
I think we should be calling our congressmen and our senators and either boycott this speech on Tuesday, or if they do attend, get up and walk out when Trump starts to speak. We've got to start calling attention to this stuff. I don't think, and for lack of a better term, I don't think we should keep trying to be nice and follow all the rules, because it's kind of leading nowhere. And my other thought was, after what happened on Friday, I think we should change the first name of some of these people, from like Donald Trump to Vladimir Trump, Mike Johnson to Vladimir Johnson, and start making people question or think about, well, why are they calling him Vladimir? And maybe that would make them look into some of this about how we're being taken over by or becoming a annex of Russia.
Yeah. Yeah, appreciate the call. I want to take a couple more, and then I'll...
Thank you.
No, thank you. And I'll take a couple more, and then I'll respond. Let's go to Will from Bushkill, Pennsylvania. Will, you're on the air.
Hey, Jefferson. I am so far in opposition to Carville's view.
Sure.
Let me just lay. I think he needs to retire. But here's my suggestion for a strategy. Yes, the Democrats should go to the Third Reich speech tomorrow night. Yeah, absolutely, they should go. And at a pre-planned time, they should all stand up and do the Musk salute with one difference: give him the finger and then walk out. And if that seems like goofy or over the top, we are light years away from any normalcy at this point. That would not backfire. It would get people energized. The only people that are still supporting this monster at this point are never, ever, ever going to change. That would get normal walking around Americans saying, you know what, I'm with the Democrats. They need to fight back like our damn lives. We are at war, and they had better start acting accordingly. That's my opinion.
Appreciate the call, Will. Thanks for calling. Thanks for being part of the community. Here's what I will say. Where I agree pretty strongly is that we should not be polite for sake of politeness. We should not be nice for the sake of niceness, or for the sake of decorum, for the sake of civility. That we shouldn't try to act normal for sake of normalcy. These are not normal times. These are not principled times. These are not moral times, not a set of moral principles that is leading what's happening in Washington, D.C., and we should not be constrained by worrying that some conduct would be out of the ordinary, because what's happening is out of the ordinary. So let me. Anybody say, "Oh, that'd be too much." Oh no, don't do that, because it'd be too much. But I'd say that's what's already happening is too much. So that's not the question. It's not should we be polite or nice. Is it time? Is it time to like put on the gloves or take off the gloves? That's not what I'm worried about. Or if I'm worried about it, I absolutely don't want people to think, "Oh, geez, I couldn't do that. That'd be too much." That's not what should be in our way. The question we should be asking is, what will be effective? What will yield strategic results? And that's a good question. Now, a bunch of people flipping off the president. It's a good question. People can make their own judgment. I'm not saying don't flip off. I'm definitely not saying don't flip off because it's not warranted. I am saying if you're gonna make your movie, if you're gonna make your play, if you're gonna make your little bit of theater, what do you want that theater to say? Who do you want to be the stars of it? And if it's me, I don't want it to just be politicians, because I know there aren't politicians who have over blank approval rating. It's not because I want to protect them. It's not because I want them to protect themselves. I think they should be willing to go to whatever mats there are, go to whatever extreme measures they might go to. It's not because I think they should calm down. This is not a moment for calm. It is a moment for strategy and tactics and intelligence and scripting it like a movie you want to have. We know that in the civil rights movement, that TV images of fire hoses and dogs changed minds and hearts of people in America. That mattered more than some politician, some member of the U.S. Senate, some member of the U.S. House that, by the way, most people haven't even heard of. There's not that many super famous elected politicians. And the ones there are, their approval rating ain't like what Ralph Nader's was in the early 70s, ain't like what a Pope's is, ain't like what a new activist, ain't like what a new activist who hasn't yet been tainted by the anti-activist, anti-democracy communication propaganda machine. That who are the best messengers? Who do you want to have be the face of a counter movement? That, to me, is the first question. Second, something to keep in mind. On my mind has been the Reichstag fire. Now, people know that story, right? So the Reichstag building in 1933 was burned down. It was blamed on those who were resisting the new Nazi Party. And the Nazi Party used the Reichstag fire as an excuse to ratchet down even further. Now, that is an important message because what we now know, and the reason I don't think we should be constrained by the pro-democracy folks should not be constrained by normalcy, is because we now know it is very, very clear that there's not a sense of principles, there's not a sense of normalcy, there's not a sense of sort of traditional whatever the heck that is constraining the current power apparatus. We have to get that through our skulls. And I do believe with the callers who are coming in and say, oh, we've got to be willing to go blank, that I share pretty deeply that emotional instinct because we don't yet have a supermajority of the country. We don't even yet have a majority of the country. I don't even think we have a supermajority of people who voted against Trump. Maybe slight, but I don't think we have 49% of the country right now who has come to grips with how serious this is. That this isn't just a battle of politicians. This isn't just like, oh, it's Trump versus the Democrats. That's not the thing. In fact, one of the smartest things I read over the weekend and it's been making the rounds among some strategic folks in D.C. I'll share some of the contents. Was actually saying, its comment was, don't focus on Trump. Got to make the tent as big as possible. What's actually happening with these Dark Enlightenment folks, what's actually happening with these Musk folks, what's actually happening with these Peter Thiel, Mark Andreessen folks is as a takeover of the American government, working with foreign oligarchs that is so scary, so big, that we have to have a supermajority of Americans who come to grips with it to try to stop it. And so then what's the theater you need? What's the movie you need? What's the protests you need? What's the fire hoses and dogs you need? What's the not Reichstag fire you need to be able to build the kind of coalition that will in fact defend America, will in fact defend democracy? What can we do that will get supermajority support? I know if somebody flips off the president, they will be channeling how I feel. They will get me nodding my head. They will get me cheering. They might even get me showing up to something for them. What's the thing that will get more and more Americans to buy into the idea that what's happening in the country right now isn't okay, that it needs to change? Here's my general thought of protesting. And by the way, we saw these rules being violated during the first Trump administration, and it didn't help. It was good to show rage. It was good to protest. But when we're doing it, and by the way, Gandhi figured this out, and Martin Luther King figured this out, that I was just in South Africa, Mandela figured this out. That when you are resisting, when you are protesting, when you are being the opposition, act in a way that when people are watching, they think you should be in charge. That if it is the person asking for more power, or it's the movement asking for more power, or it's the political party asking for more power, they should act in a way that when the people watching think those people should have more power. Those people should be more in charge. That doesn't necessarily mean politeness. Sometimes it absolutely does not mean that. But keep that in mind in your principles. Maybe that includes flipping people off. But ask the question and consider it. What will yield supermajority agreement that what's happening right now is not okay? And what will get a supermajority of people to look at the set of actors who are pushing for a new direction saying, yep, those people ought to be in charge. Those, I think, are key principles. What I'm sure of is don't just wait for politicians to do it, and don't just ask politicians to do it. Very often, the very best spokespeople are not politicians. Politicians are followers as much as they are leaders, and that's not me knocking them. Most people who comment have never had to stand for election, have never had to raise a dollar, have never had to ask or answer a question, have never had to sit in a caucus room and negotiate a bill and understand that, like most haven't. Most journalists who talk about this stuff haven't. They've been spectators and writers their whole lives, and it's yet another barrier to people understanding what's going on. What I want to understand, as much as inside the buildings are powerful, outside the buildings are powerful. We have to build that strategy. It's not just what you want them to do, it's what you're going to do. It's what each of us are going to do. We're going to be back after the break.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
You are listening to Thom Hartmann. 202-808-9925. We'll be right back. And we are back. Let's go to your calls. Let's go to Brad, who wins the Most Patient Listener Award from Elk Grove. Go ahead, Brad.
Hello. Yes. Here's my point. The Republicans have all been saying Volodymyr Zelensky was out of line for looking for security guarantees before either signing that agreement for the minerals or a peace agreement. And my thought is two things. First of all, Trump has no business demanding repayment of grants we made to make our security better. Number two, I don't see where Trump is going to be paying anything for the minerals. He's going to get half the minerals, and so why wouldn't Zelensky want a security guarantee? And then I go back to 1938 in Munich. We were talking about the Reichstag fire. The only reason Hitler did not immediately invade Czechoslovakia, his army was not strong enough yet, number one. Number two, related to that, France and Britain were the security guarantee behind Czechoslovakia that they made before they signed that worthless piece in our time, piece of paper.
Give me the key. Make sure we got the key point, Brad. Before we go to break.
Go ahead. I'll let you answer off air about that security guarantee. And I feel Zelensky was perfectly right in asking for it. All right, I'll take it off there.
Brad, thank you so much for the call. Anybody who's paying attention to reality, any neutral, if such a thing even could exist, any neutral third-party observer who is going to craft a pathway to Trump's word peace. He does not mean peace, he means domination. He means oppression. He means takeover. He means Russian kowtowing. He means theft. When he says peace, that's what he means. Okay? That anybody trying to craft a path to a legitimate peace would understand that it has to include security guarantees. Otherwise, it really is. And I've said this before, but it's not a coincidence this is happening more than 80 years after World War II. It's not a coincidence. Because now we have, Tom has talked about before, sort of every 80 years you have a big thing that happens around the world. And I think legitimately one of the mechanisms, and the example I use over and over again is the Civil War following the War of Independence in the United States, the Revolutionary War, is that after the Revolutionary War veterans had passed away, when there were very, very few of them around, then all of a sudden you could have these conversations in the South about trying to secede from the Union so they could own human beings, right? Harder to do when people who had fought for independence were still alive to smack that person around verbally or otherwise. We'll be back.
Hey, thanks so much for sharing our program and for reaching out to our stations and sponsors and letting them know that you're listening. It really means a lot to us. You know, other countries enjoy benefits like free health care in college, modern mass transit, affordable housing, food, and drugs. They also have inexpensive internet and phone service without companies listening and selling their information. Schools that don't need to mention school shooters. Streets and parks filled with pedestrians and children instead of tents and homeless people. We, on the other hand, have the world's largest collection of billionaires. Most Americans probably didn't realize this was the choice they were making back in the election of 1980 when Reagan and Bush promised morning in America. But here we are. We have been just basically sold out to the billionaires by all these years of Republican, Reaganomics. What do we do about it? Well, there's a lot we can do about it, and it starts with getting politically active. There's a great op-ed about this over at HartmannReport.com. It's titled, America Chose Wealth Over Well-Being. Check it out.
We are back. I think we have time for another call before we go to break. 2 minutes. Ziggy, you are on the air.
Trump is bad.
There you go. I couldn't have said it better myself, Ziggy. It's hard to, you can expand upon it, but it's hard to improve upon it.
Yeah, I know. Well, you said so Friday, and we need everyone who calls today and says hello to you instead of saying hello, say Trump is bad.
All right.
But why I called is tomorrow is a day of protest at noon. All across the nation, people are going out at noon to protest Trump. You can find out about a protest near you by going to 5051, and just click on the button that says find a protest, and you'll find a protest for yourself that you can go to. And quickly, my thought on what during the State of the Union address, what the Democrats should do is when Trump tells his first lie, Congressman number one just stand up and yell, "That's a lie." And then when he does a second lie, Congressman number two stands up and yells, "That's a lie." And they keep on doing that through his whole speech. Every time he lies, somebody stands up and yells, "That's a lie."
I hear your point, Ziggy. Thank you for the call, and I agree with you. Trump is bad. Tyrone, we got about 45 seconds. You're on the air.
Oh, man, not enough time in the world, but I appreciate you taking the call. A lot to say. We're living in a really, really tumultuous time in America. I don't think Americans are engaged. I think people are gauged in terms of their world. I think our young people need to be galvanized in this movement against what is happening in our country. And Dr. King said it best. He said that this whole idea of America was injustice anywhere is a threat to injustice everywhere. And, the MAGAs, the Red Hats, the people that voted for Trump that realize now that they didn't vote for this, they're going to pop up and pop out. And, I think that, our, the government, the Republicans that are siding with Trump and are really afraid to speak about what they really should be doing. The roost is coming home to roost. And it's going to be a tough time for us in America, but we're going to get through it. And in the words of Tom, Mr. Nader, Ralph Nader, you know, he talked about there being a, you know, probably likely, you know, in terms of, you know, one being one, you know.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
In addition to bringing you the Thom Hartmann Program here on Free Speech TV and Video Media Online, we also have a whole set of ways you can interact with us and tools you can use to spread the word about the importance of democracy and the threats to it in our republic. First, there's your daily homework. Sue Nethercutt puts together a daily email newsletter that has a link to every story I discuss on the air, so you can find my sources and you can share them with your friends. It's free and you can sign up at thomhartmann.com. Second, I publish my daily take every day over at the hartmannreport.com website. That's also free if you want the daily 5 days a week rant in your inbox. No ads either. Third, we have the podcasts. There's the free 1-hour version of our daily show that's advertising supported. You can find that wherever you get your podcasts normally. And then there's also the podcast of the entire 3-hour show with no advertisements, and that's available by subscription over at thomhartmann.com. So check them all out at thomhartmann.com and hartmannreport.com.
We say fight back!
Under Socialism and Other Arguments for Economic Independence by Kristen Godsey. And this is from the introduction titled, You Might Be Suffering from Capitalism. The argument of this book can be summed up succinctly. Unregulated capitalism is bad for women. And if we adopt some ideas from socialism, women will have better lives. If done properly, socialism leads to economic independence, better labor conditions, better work-family balance, and yes, even better sex. Finding a way into a better future requires learning from the mistakes of the past, including a thoughtful assessment of the history of 20th century state socialism in Eastern Europe. That's it. If you like the idea of such outcomes, then come along for an exploration of how we might change things. If you're dubious because you don't understand why capitalism as an economic system is uniquely bad for women, and if you doubt that there could ever be anything good about socialism, this short treatise will provide some illumination. If you don't give a whit about women's lives because you're a gynophobic right-wing internet troll, save your money and go back to your parents' basement. Write the book for you. Of course, some might argue that unregulated capitalism sucks for almost everyone, but I want to focus on how capitalism disproportionately harms women. Competitive labor markets discriminate against those whose reproductive biology makes them primarily responsible for childbearing. Today, this means humans who get pink hats in the hospital and the letter F next to the name on their birth certificate, as if we've already failed by not coming into the world as a boy. Competitive labor markets also devalue those expected to be the primary caregivers of children. Although societal attitudes have evolved in this regard, our idealization of motherhood means that most of us still believe that baby needs mama, a whole lot more than papa, at least until the child is old enough to play sports. Others will argue that unregulated capitalism is not bad for all women. Yes, for those women lucky enough to sit at the top of the income distribution, the system works pretty well. Although women at the executive level still face gender pay gaps and remain underrepresented in leadership positions, on the whole, things aren't too shabby for the Sheryl Sandbergs of the world. Of course, sexual harassment still hinders progress, even for those at the top, and too many women believe that if you want to run with the big dogs, you may have to suck it up and ignore the groping and unwanted advances. And race plays an important role as well. White women do a lot better in aggregate than do women of color. But when we look at society as a whole, on average, women are comparatively worse off in countries where markets are less encumbered by regulation, taxation, and public enterprises than they are in nations where state revenues support greater levels of redistribution and larger social safety nets. Choose your data source, and you find the same story. Unemployment and poverty plague women with children. Employers discriminate against women without children because they might have them in the future. In the United States in 2013, women over the age of 65 suffered from poverty at much greater rates than men and dominated those in the category of extreme poverty. Globally, women face higher rates of economic deprivation. Women are often the last to be hired and the first to be fired in cyclical downturns. And when they do find employment, bosses pay them less than men. When states need to slash government spending on education, health care, or old age pensions, mothers, daughters, sisters, and wives must pick up the slack, diverting their energy to care for the young, the sick, and the elderly. Capitalism thrives on women's unpaid labor in the home because women's care work supports lower taxes. Lower taxes mean higher profits for those already at the top of the income ladder, mostly men. But capitalism was not always so savage. Throughout much of the 20th century, state socialism presented an existential challenge to the worst excesses of the free market. The threat posed by Marxist ideologies forced Western governments to expand social safety nets to protect workers from the unpredictable but inevitable booms and busts of the capitalist economy. After the Berlin Wall fell, many celebrated the triumph of the West, consigning socialist ideas to the dustbin of history. But for all its faults, state socialism provided an important foil for capitalism. It was in response to a global discourse of social and economic rights, a discourse that appealed not only to the progressive populations of Africa, Asia, and Latin America, but also to many men and women in Europe and Western Europe and North America, that politicians agreed to improve working conditions for wage laborers, as well as to create social programs for children, the poor, the elderly, the sick, and the disabled, mitigating exploitation and the growth of income inequality. Although there were important antecedents in the 1980s, once state socialism collapsed, capitalism shook off the constraints of market regulation and income redistribution. Without the looming threat of a rival superpower, the last 30 years of global neoliberalism have witnessed a rapid shriveling of social programs that protect citizens from cyclical instability and financial crises and reduce the vast inequality of economic outcomes between those at the top and those at the bottom of the income distribution. For much of the 20th century, Western capitalist countries also endeavored to outdo the East European countries in terms of women's rights, fueling progressive social change. For example, the state socialists in the USSR and Eastern Europe were so successful at giving women economic opportunities outside the home that initially, for the 2 decades after the end of World War II, women's wage work was conflated with the evils of communism. The American way of life meant male breadwinners and female homemakers. But slowly, socialist championing of women's emancipation began to chip away at the Leave It to Beaver ideal. The Soviet launch of Sputnik in 1957 spurred American leaders to rethink the costs of maintaining traditional gender roles. They feared the state socialists enjoyed an advantage in technological development and why women have better sex under socialism.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
And we are back, going straight to the phones. We've got Joe from Portland, Oregon. It's a little disrespect for me to call him Joe because I know this caller. Pop, go ahead.
Well, I am calling because I think there's some underreporting on the Zelensky debacle last week that has great significance. And this is there was an almost immediate response from Russian media praising Trump and saying how wonderful it was and condemning Zelensky. And that was possible because there was a TASS reporter in the Oval Office when it went down. TASS is the Russian media that is controlled by the government. And what that tells me is that is almost irrefutable proof that what happened when Vance went after Zelensky and became the contentious dispute between the three of them, when that went down, was planned and part of a long-term strategy designed to continue to seek the love affair between Trump and Putin, and to get us out of helping Ukraine. And the other thing that is underreported, which is really depressing to me, there is a WIC poll that they polled. They took 1,000 people, the appropriate percentage of Republicans and independents and Democrats, played 11 minutes of that debacle to them and asked their response, and a healthy majority thought that Trump and Vance did a good thing, which just scares the bejesus out of me.
Yeah. Well, Dad, thanks for the call.
What it tells me is there really is a growing Trump cult that is dominating Republican politics.
Yeah. No, that's been true for a while, but thanks for the call. We'll be doing News with My Dad in full-throated fashion tomorrow on Tuesday News Day. Love you, Papa. Thanks for calling in, and thanks for giving the task story. I'll give a little bit more off air.
Have a good one.
All right, take care. Well, I will be on air. He will be off air. So TASS, Russian state media, did gain access to the Oval Office during the press conference. There's conflicting reports. The White House says, but yeah, they got in there, but then we let them back out. It wasn't supposed to happen. They sort of snuck in. That's its own problem, right? Like, it was snuck into the Oval Office. You're not supposed to sneak into the Oval Office, but then it's incredible. But the fact that Reuters and the AP weren't allowed in the press pool during that time, let me say again, Reuters and the AP weren't allowed in the press pool during that time, but that Russian state media was allowed in, that should send pretty significant signals. That should send pretty significant signals. And yes, two things. One, everything that Pop said about now how it's being reported in Russia, and that, and also that, yeah, this was cooked up so that they could get a response. And I want this in our strategic brain. If I had a Christmas wish, and I know Christmas was a while back, but if I had a Christmas wish, it is for a strategic pro-democracy movement, a strategic progressive movement, one that gets ever and ever smarter and ever more strategic. That doesn't mean scared. That certainly doesn't mean sitting on its hands. It does mean thoughtful and intentional. Too often the word thoughtful means slower. I don't mean slower. Very often I mean faster. I mean strategic and smart with objectives in mind, tactically sound. That's what I'm urging. And recognize that much of Trump's game is to pick a fight. It's much of his game. Because think about that phrase. Pick doesn't just mean, there's a fight's going to happen. Pick means choose. Choose a fight. And he picks the fight so he can focus the attention. This is going to seem way off topic, but I got to say it. Years ago, I remember Eminem did an anti-Trump rap. And it was Eminem was pretty skillful. It was pretty courageous. Right? And this is a guy who was from the 8 Mile, from a voting district in Detroit that has consistently predicted presidential winners for a bunch of years. It is a bunch of poor white people, and poor white people have, fortunately or unfortunately, been an interesting predictor of presidential elections over the last bunch of years. And here comes Eminem from the 8 Mile, who lambasted Trump, making a video to do that. And Trump, of course, Trump always hits back who hits him, right? Trump always, anybody after goes after Trump, he has to go back. Certainly if they're high profile, got to go back at him, right? Whether it's Taylor Swift or whether it's a Democratic elected official, whether it's the leader of another sovereign nation, he's got to hit back. After Eminem did that, Trump was crickets. He was crickets. The last thing he wanted was to pick that fight. I've thought about it ever since. At least two reasons. One, because who wants to get in a battle of words, one of the great crafters of battle of words of the last time? I wouldn't get in a verbal sparring match with Eminem. That's one. Trump was scared of him. The other was he didn't want to highlight that. He didn't want to highlight a relatively young white man from the 8 Mile, from outside of the center of Detroit, criticizing the president. Trump picks the fights. He picks the fights. So we've got to figure out what fights we want to pick. What he looks for is provocation. They wanted to make Zelensky look bad. They wanted to give themselves an excuse to do what what Putin put Trump in office to do in the first place, was to help him gain power and gain territory and gain coastland in Ukraine. Gain minerals, gain farmland. So, all right, let's go back to your calls. Clay from Vicksburg, you're on the air.
Hi there. I just wanted to say first that your dad, I think he's spot on. I mean, I hate conspiracy theories, but damn, that's, what you said too about the press corps, AP not being allowed, but this guy got in. That just seems very odd. But I think you are spot on about your comment about the, we want to act like, we want to have our leader, our representatives show to be the kinds of people that people will look at them and say, that's the kind of person I want in office. Yeah. I think that's a great point. And then I also wanted to ask your opinion. What would you think about any of these news organizations that have any kind of integrity that are in the press corps to just not go, because they're not going to get anything but lies anyway. So why bother?
This is
show up. I wonder.
No, I appreciate that call and I appreciate the suggestion. This is the kind of protest. Thanks so much for your call, and thanks so much for calling Vicksburg. By the way, keep spreading the faith. So this is the kind of protest. This is the kind of boycott that I think makes eminent sense. It's got a moral underpinning. And I think that's really important, right? You don't just protest for show, and you don't just protest on emotion. You protest with a moral base, and you protest thinking about who you want the enemy to be and who you want the face to be, who you want where you want that focus to be. And the media should be saying, if you are going to understand that it's not, and by the way, Jane Meyer from the New Yorker, if you want to listen to somebody, listen to her. She is consistently demonstrating good judgment about this stuff, and she understands the gravity. And for members of the press to say, listen, if for the first time in anybody's memory that the presidency, that the political office within the presidency is going to decide who gets to report on White House news up close, that's fine. That's fine. We're going to do something else entirely. And deciding what they're going to cover, changing how they do things, and making it really clear to people, and doing more than just what the New York Times editorial page did, was take out the full page editorial against Trump during the election, but regularly reporting and including within commentary how this stuff is not only against the norm, but bad, anti-democratic, the kind of thing that cannot stand, and they have got to stand against it. I think that is the kind of thing, not just relying on politicians, but relying on people with other kinds of levers of power. Last word for you, Clay.
Well, that's pretty much it. I'm glad that you think that might be a reasonable approach, because I just think the more you ignore Trump, the more he's going to hate it.
I agree with you. I think that's strategic.
A good thing.
Yep. I think that's strategic.
All right, thanks.
Appreciate it. And here's another thing. Think about when you're, and I want to say this, because when I'm saying strategic, I don't mean calm down. It's kind of the opposite that I mean. Now is not a time to calm down. Now is time to take the rage and turn it into a laser beam, is to focus it and make it clear and precise what you want to try to accomplish. We won't always get it right. Lasers will be pointed in different directions. That's okay. But be as intentional as we can. That's the thing I think the moment requires. In addition to rage and fear, not to be frozen and then to act. And when you act with intention. So as you're thinking about where you want to point your laser beam, think about where it can have impact. Think about if a group of people did a thing, they might be able to change the conduct of that entity. I do think people who are subscribers asking their media entities to do blank sometimes might be able to get those media entities to listen, and they might start doing blank, right? That is the kind of place where you might, the problem protesting Trump, not only does he like it, and I'm not saying don't do it. The problem is not only does he like it, it lets him pick that fight, lets him focus on attention. He likes the attention on him, but also he's not changing his mind because of what a protester says. He might change his mind if the economy tanks. He might change his mind if the media tanks on him. He might change his mind if other world leaders say things. He might change his mind if other leaders of major corporations start acting differently and not just kowtowing to him as they're doing now. Think about who your target is. Think about who you're trying to persuade. We got to go to break in a minute, and then we'll come back. So I guess I would ask, here's a question for you. Who do you think are those targets? Where do you think, and like convincing some Democratic politicians to vote against Trump, they all are, right? There's not even a Joe Manchin now. And that's not to the good, by the way. Joe Manchin was a vote that would have been very useful right now. But that's not me agreeing with him on any number of policy issues, to be very, very, very clear. But where do you think the levers of power are right now? If you're one of those people with rage, where do you want to point it? If there's somebody you're trying to persuade, who do you think could be persuaded? If you've already written off your MAGA hat wearing cousin or uncle, where do you think is a point of leverage? How can we have a smarter, strategic, more tactical, progressive, pro-democracy movement? We'll be back on Tom's show, your show. I'm Jeff.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program. Speed round coming up next. Bruce from Petaluma, you are on the air. Bruce, can you hear me? Bruce, I can't hear you, so give another crack at it. We will go to Dan from Roxy. You're on the air, Dan.
Hey, well, I just wanted to touch base on it. I hate Trump, too. But what, like my Angelo says, when someone shows you who they are, believe them.
Yeah.
But it's not just Trump. It's the Republican Party. We need to focus on the Republican Party, too. But the reason I called in is Zelensky needs to focus on kids. I don't understand when he was talking to Trump, he was showing him pictures of priests, talking about priests being kidnapped. And I was thinking, no. The way you get to these so-called Christians in America is you
wow,
children.
Dan, that's smart.
Show pictures of children. Show pictures of children. Talk about all those children that they kidnapped and sent over to Russia. Thousands of them. Not to mention the ones they killed when they bombed the schools. Those pictures should be shown. Right?
Dan, this
they're missing a big opportunity.
So I'm gonna, and in this way, I'm gonna try to give grace to Zelensky, because this stuff is hard, right? And particularly can be hard in the moment, particularly hard when you don't know you're falling into a trap, because there have been ages of principles and norms and practices in global diplomacy, and J.D. Vance, little round-faced J.D., and Trump, violated all of those. So it's hard to prepare for, right? It's also hard to prepare for something when literally you're in the middle of a war and literally your people are being killed. And I had some Monday morning quarterbacking, some afterwards thinking of what I thought he might have been able to do. I don't think I would have thought of it in the moment, or at least wouldn't give 80% confidence that I would have. And I wasn't as smart as you were. So what I was thinking that he ought to have done is when Donald Trump, because early on, one of the things that set them off, one of the things that got Vance and Trump knowing they had to change the narrative of this thing by attacking Zelensky, was Zelensky had started out the press conference showing some pictures, as you mentioned, showing pictures of adults, returning soldiers. And Trump and J.D. Vance were like, oh, we don't want to let that happen. What had occurred to me was that when they started lambasting him, that Zelensky could have, and again, this is after the fact. It's easy to say after the fact. Hindsight's so much easier. But that while they're lambasting him, so this is, of course, are the clips that are going to be repeated and repeated and repeated and repeated, that he take out one of the pictures and say, this isn't about me. This is about these people. This is about the people of Ukraine. So that then the pictures that are going around the world, certainly in the United States, are of those. But what you just said, Dan, was way better than what I said. And way better than what I thought, because the picture that he could have shown, instead of showing a returning soldier, so the children of Ukraine that are being hurt, because that actually could reach. That could be like fire hoses and dogs. That could be the kind of
how we
image.
ended Vietnam.
There you go.
It's how we pictures of soldiers. Remember, that's how we ended Vietnam. That's how we turned on the politicians.
Yeah. Yeah. No, Dan, it's
same principle. Same principle.
It's exactly right. And let me tell you, let's keep building audience in your area in Mississippi. Your second straight Mississippi caller.
Absolutely.
Let us keep on building audience there. To my friends in Mississippi who want the South to rise again, let's rise with democracy. Let's rise with love in our hearts for everybody in the country. Let's rise for equality. If you think Elon Musk gives a lick about you, you got another thing coming. We'll be back.
Change starts with you. You can be calling your Democratic or Republican representatives to let them know what you think by calling 202-224-3121. It's the Capitol switchboard. It'll get you right through to them. So remember the John Durham investigation in which he said, the FBI never should have looked into Donald Trump's connections to Russia. And I'm scratching my head going, how can he even think this? I mean, the guy that Donald Trump hired as his first campaign manager, Paul Manafort had taken $66 million from oligarchs associated with Vladimir Putin to install Viktor Yanukovych as the dictator of Ukraine. $66 million. He took money from, he was paid $1 million by the dictator of Zaire, back when it was Zaire, to develop a strong relationship with Moscow. And when finally they threw Yanukovych out of Ukraine, that was in 2015, what did Manafort do? He came to the United States and he said to Donald Trump, well, let me help you, while he's taking money from Moscow. I mean, if nothing else, that should have been a starting point, a huge starting point for the FBI. There's a whole rant about this over at HartmannReport.com. Check it out.
Back. Let's get to your calls. Let's go to Mike, who wins the most patient listener award. Go ahead, Mike.
Yeah, I think what Congress should do is let the Trump tax cuts expire and use the Obama tax cuts instead. That will raise revenue and there will be no cuts to anything. We had a double-digit gains in the stock market and a great economy under Obama. Most of government waste is in big pharma, defense spending, corporate health care companies billing us to death, and bad corporate subsidies. We need to lift the cap to $1 million for Social Security. We need to call Trump out as he screws up. Today, he let 800 national oceanic weather people fire him today. Another thing is Tesla's stock is down 25% valuation. His wealth is down $100 billion. Thank you, America. Boycott Tesla.
Mike, thanks for the great call. Appreciate your time. Let's go straight. We got 1 minute for Brian in Minneapolis. You're on the air.
Yes, thank you. Because Trump and Musk have confiscated the U.S. Treasury, there should be a moratorium nationally on all foreclosures and evictions. If the Democrats could unite behind this, this would push back about what everything the Republicans are doing.
Appreciate the call.
J.B. Pritzker said yesterday there'll be 770,000 Illinoisans lose their health coverage, yet Medicaid flowing.
Yeah. And we will, and thank you, Brian, for the call. Before we go to break, let me say that we will, I want to make sure that I'm not falling into traps. This Ukraine stuff is real. This Ukraine stuff is significantly what was behind. Like, why was there so much foreign support? Why did Donald Trump go to Russia in 1987 and come back and start pushing against American foreign policy in favor of Russian foreign policy? This has been a long time coming so that Russia could start regaining global military power and projecting more power through Eastern Europe. I also want to make sure we're paying attention to what's happening here, including the 800 Oceanic Works who just got fired today. We'll be back.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
We are going to get to every single caller who's on the board right now after this break.
In the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Homewreckers by Aaron Glantz, a Pulitzer Prize finalist. The subtitle is How a Gang of Wall Street Kingpins, Hedge Fund Magnates, Crooked Banks, and Venture Capitalists suckered millions out of their homes and demolished the American dream. It's quite a subtitle. This is from chapter 21, titled Triumph of the Homewreckers. Donald Trump took the oath of office on a chilly Friday morning, delivering an inaugural address that promised an end to the corruption and impotence that had widened America's historic wealth gap. He understood that his victory had been propelled by harnessing the public's rage and envy at having been left behind in the economic recovery, and that he promised that he would not forget it. Evoking FDR's famous Forgotten Man speech from 1932 that promised to prioritize the needs of, quote, the man at the bottom of the economic pyramid, Trump declared, quote, the forgotten men and women of our country will be forgotten no longer. Politicians had prospered, he said, but jobs had evaporated, factories closed. Quote, the establishment protected itself, but not the citizens of our country. Their victories have not been your victories. Their triumphs have not been your triumphs. And while they celebrated in our nation's capital, there was little chance to celebrate for struggling families all across our land. This all changes, starting right here and right now, Trump proclaimed. Because this moment is your moment. It belongs to you. This is your day. This is your celebration. End of quote. The moment, however, belonged not to the great mass of struggling Americans, but to the new president's most ardent supporters, flamboyant businessmen who profited off the pain of the housing bust and were now poised to steer the ship of state for at least the next 4 years. As Trump reached out his hand and swore to preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States of America, his close friend and inaugural committee chair, Tom Barack, stood behind him, smiling in a blue scarf and black overcoat. Afterward, Barack and Trump embraced at the U.S. Capitol's inaugural platform. The homewreckers had arrived. Barack didn't take an official position in the Trump administration, reportedly turning down an offer to be White House Chief of Staff, Treasury Secretary, or Ambassador to Mexico. Roger Stone told me he could have had any position he wanted, but working for the government would have meant making a lot less money. I don't think he has the belly for public service, Stone observed. Other homewreckers had no such qualms. If they changed the rules of the game now, they could make more money later. Steve Mnuchin, by now dubbed the foreclosure king by his critics, was confirmed as Treasury Secretary. His top deputy at One West, the bank, Joseph Otting, became the nation's chief bank regulator, the comptroller of the currency. Wilbur Ross, the bankruptcy tycoon who bought Florida's Bank United, became the Commerce Secretary, charged with everything from negotiating trade deals to overseeing the U.S. Census. Steve Schwarzman, the chairman of Blackstone, became chair of the White House's Strategic and Policy Forum, a group of business leaders who were to meet regularly with Trump. Jamie Dimon of J.P. Morgan Chase was named vice chair. Though the group disbanded over the summer after Trump's statement that bigotry and violence on many sides were responsible for a white nationalists killing a counter-protester in Charlottesville, Virginia, Schwarzman, along with Barack, is said to be among a small group of outsiders, including Sean Hannity, who are put directly through to the president rather than being routed through the normal communications channels. Hannity reportedly chats with Trump nightly. Schwarzman has flown on Air Force One. On February 12, 2017, less than a month into Trump's presidency, while the commander-in-chief was dining with Prime Minister Shinzo Abe of Japan at his Mar-a-Lago golf club, Schwarzman threw a massive 70th birthday bash at his Four Winds estate, barely a mile and a half away. This time, neither Donald nor Melania Trump could make it, but daughter Ivanka and son-in-law Jared Kushner did, along with Mnuchin, Ross, and a who's who of high finance and culture, from Henry Kravis, co-founder of the hostile takeover firm Kohlberg Kravis Roberts, to the fashion designer Donatella Versace. The party featured live camels, trapeze artists, fireworks, and a gondolier. Schwartzman's tennis courts were covered with Asian-themed staging. The man who'd hired Patti LaBelle to sing Happy Birthday for his 60th was serenaded by Gwen Stefani on his 70th. After Happy Birthday, the peroxide pop star took a, quote, a quick twirl with the birthday boy around a dance floor constructed inside a two-story tent where acrobats shimmied and jumped, the New York Times reported. Unlike a decade before, when Schwartzman's glorious pre-bust bash sparked condemnation from sources as conservative as the Wall Street Journal, this time the festivities sparked very little blowback. In her story, Bloomberg reporter Amanda Gordon reveled in the comparison with Schwartzman's 60th. There were some differences, though, she wrote. Remember that beautiful fur coat on Melania Trump? It was New York in February on a weeknight. This time, no bundling required, with many folks golfing and swimming all day before a balmy night and fireworks alongside a full moon. Howard Marks, the co-chairman of Oak Tree Capital, a vulture firm that had bought and flipped 3,000 foreclosures, told Gordon, quote, "The world is an uncertain place. A lot of people are unhappy with a lot of other people. There are a lot of things that people are upset about. So it's nice to have an evening where everybody's happy, harmonious, and upbeat." End quote. There was a lot of celebrating to be had. In June, the gang got together for the marriage of Steve Mnuchin and his third wife, actress Louise Linton, almost 2 decades younger than him. And then it continues from there. The book is Homewreckers by Aaron Glantz.
Do you know that the ancient Roman Republic, which for 480 years was actually a democratic republic before Julius Caesar kind of ended the democracy phase and replaced it with the autocracy phase, that they were brought down by a very small group of very rich people. The richest man in ancient Rome was Marcus Licinius Crassus. He was the richest guy, the billionaire of Rome. And he frankly hated the Roman free bread for all welfare system. It was being paid for with his tax dollars, after all. So him and Pompey the Great and a few other rich guys got together, and they basically crashed Rome. They turned it into an oligarchy and then into a tyranny. And the parallels to what Trump is doing right now are absolutely shocking. There's an article about it over at HartmannReport.com titled "American Caesar, Trump's Path to Power Mirrors Rome's Darkest Days." Check it out.
I made a bold claim we were going to clear the board. We're going to get all these wonderful people to fill this room with their intelligence. Means we have to do speed round. That's why I'm talking so fast, also because that's kind of sometimes how I talk. Janelle from Denver, Colorado, you are on the air.
Yes, good morning, Jefferson. I have a question and also a comment. My husband and I are seniors. We're in our 70s. We've been doing everything we can. We hate what we see happening in our government. My husband is the product of his family was all lost except his grandfather to the Holocaust. And we see the horrors that are happening. Yep. It's terrifying to us. We are getting ready to march tomorrow at our Capitol here. And I want to know what kind of messaging would be more of a unifying? I mean, we saw thousands of signs, everybody saying, everyone protesting something. And I want to know what we can do to maybe get a more unified message across. And if you have any ideas.
Oh, Janelle, it's such a good question.
And also, Trump is.
Yeah, so it's such a good question. I'm going to dodge it, but for a good reason, because I want to keep my promise of clearing the board, and then I'm going to answer it. Let me say something short. One, don't be too worried if the thing you say is a sign that not everybody else has. It's more important that people do stuff than people do the perfect thing. Have a bias for action. Yes, I am preaching, trying to get unified messages, absolutely being thoughtful and strategic, trying to aim that laser beam. And with all of that, bias for action. Don't be frozen. Don't have analysis paralysis. Bias for action. Go out. It's better to try and fail than not try at all. So that's the first thing I'll say. Another quick thing I'll say. I like thinking about you. And Janelle, I don't just mean you. I mean, if I'm you, I like thinking about the you you're trying to reach. That's why I like Trump is bad for you. Not just Trump is bad for you. And that doesn't mean the sign doesn't have to be about Trump. I think I would focus on tearing down public structures is bad for you. Tearing down stuff that protects you against bird flu, which, by the way, is increasing the price of eggs, and that is Trump's fault. Firing people who are going to protect our oceans. Firing people who are protecting us from planes crashing in the sky. Tearing down America is bad for you. I'm workshopping it out loud as I try to answer your question, and I don't mind that. They're tearing down America. Not tearing down the government. They're not firing employees. They're tearing down America. And it's not just tearing down America. Tearing down America is bad. And it's not just a tearing down America is bad for you. All right, we just went through a quick writing consulting session, and that's what I came up with. Tearing down America is bad for you. What do you think, Janelle?
I love it. That's great. We'll make a sign.
All right, Janelle, thanks so much. Keep at it. Let's go to Early. You're from Hillsborough. Go ahead, Early.
Hi. My name is Early Pennington, and I'm from the Philippines, and I'm now a citizen of the United States. I am a veteran activist on the street. We got rid of Ferdinand Marcos, who ruled the Philippines for 20 years during martial law. We were out on the street day and night.
Yeah.
People did not leave the street. Some went home, some stayed. People, after work, sleep on the street at night, wake up and back to work. We did not leave the street except when we have to march to other places and spread our protest.
Yeah.
So that's what we need to do. Be out on the street every day. I would say night and day, but because of the weather, the cold weather, we just have to be there on the street day or every day.
Early, thank you so much. Thank you so much for that call and for being able to bring your own experience to urge people to do what you've already seen and, in fact, already done. Thank you so much and encourage folks. I had my old friend Ben Fain started a peace vigil back when peace didn't mean letting Russia just annihilate people in Ukraine without consequence, and would hold that vigil on the side of the road, and it went on for years. It went on for years until we pulled out of Iraq and Afghanistan. So, Early, thank you so much for that call. Monica from Texas, you are on the air.
Hi, Jeff. How are you?
I'm good.
The reason I'm telling you this, I was born in Germany, and people didn't organize against the Nazis early enough.
Yeah.
And what I've been doing the last couple of days is trying to encourage Democrats in the Capitol to walk out after Trump gets on the podium and just walk out.
Yeah.
Because we need to tell the people that we care. And guess what, Mr. Trump? I'm not even going to say president. We don't care what you have to say.
Yep.
Because it's our country, and you do not represent me.
Yeah. And Monica, this is the strongest argument against, something embedded in what I heard you say, is the strongest argument against the Carville take. And I'm still processing that, to be clear. But the strongest argument against the Carville take is, if we don't show an alternative, if we don't show that there is a better path that is important and there are people ready to lead for that better path, I think two bad things happen. One is that people might not think it's that important, so they don't need to care either. And two, they don't know who to follow. They don't know who that alternative might be. They don't know who to support in order to get that alternative. So that's why just like hiding and freezing is not a good response. And I'm not against a walkout. What I do want to say is that we shouldn't put all our eggs in the basket of asking Democratic elected officials to do blank. Everything we do that can make it, that can start changing that public narrative, everything we do that can start changing that public conversation to see the impacts that these cuts are having, see the impacts that our lack of loyalty to American principles, American values, the American Constitution, American allies, see the impact that is having. That would make a boycott more effective, might make a boycott more likely, and give more cover for those who are doing that kind of thing. Last word for you, Monica.
Well, I totally agree with what you're saying, but where do we start?
Yeah.
We have to start somewhere.
Yeah.
And what I'm guessing is what my gut says, people are going to be tuning in tomorrow.
Yeah.
Right?
Yep.
And that would be the first step for Democrats to say, we care about the people, sir. We do not care about what you have to say. That would be a start. That's my only gut instinct based on what I went through in Germany. Yeah. That's all.
Monica, I thank you so much for the call. Thanks for being part of this community.
Thanks.
Cheers.
Bye.
Let us go to Tom, wins the Most Patient Listener Award. Go ahead, Tom.
Yeah, thanks for taking the call. I think what the Democrats have to do, rather than, you can do the demonstrations and everything you want, but you're not going to win elections, and you have to win elections to stop Trump in this, is to get the skilled unions like the Teamsters back into your fold. I mean, you lost them. You can't win the battlegrounds with them. So you've got to dismantle your platform as it is now and build it right on the middle class, right on skilled unions, because I don't think they understood. 80% of skilled union people don't have children, but we do have the tax cuts. The middle class portion of the 7217 tax cuts are very important to us, and the Democrats were dismissive. And we also have excellent health care. We don't want parts of Medicare for all. That's why a lot of people shifted like me. I would love to have a Democratic Party that didn't abandon me. And if you want to win elections and stop this, you've got to go back to the middle class. And I'm begging you would.
Let me go back to that for a second. When you think about, and I know some of the moves, right? I mean, I know that's why Trump talked so much about NAFTA, and then he passed a trade agreement that basically just spelled it differently. And I know that's why he goes after social issues, so he can go after that skilled worker and say, what do you care about? What do you care about abortion, or heck, what do you care about, trans rights or whatever else? I know some of those. And I heard what you said about tax cuts. When you think about a policy set that is focused on the middle class, what are the couple of things that come to you first?
I would say we would keep our tax cuts. Mm-hmm. We can keep our medical insurance and not have it go to something, this Medicare for all plan, that would try to keep in low, which that could be a risk with Trump, but it could also be a risk with the Democrats if they, if these guaranteed incomes came through. Mm-hmm. And finally, don't tax corporations so heavily that it's going to hurt our retirement investments. And they were on the wrong side of all these issues, unfortunately. And I was a union rep for 24 years. I always, for the first 12 years, was Democrat. But they've abandoned us, and their policies would have hurt us.
What I'd push back, and I know that we've moved to employer-based for years. We have employer-based healthcare. I'll say this quickly, and then I want to get another caller to try to keep my promise. Thank you so much, Tom, for the call. Thank you. I want to push back a little bit on the abandonedness. I agree that there needs to be a louder call and a focus on middle-class economic policy, including skilled trades, and not only Teamsters, also longshoremen, et cetera, also plumbers, pipe fitters, et cetera. And that does mean smart on tax policy. But let's be clear. On tax policy, like, Trump's not pushing for a middle-class tax cut. He's not pushing for a tax cut for people who earn between, $50,000 and $100,000, even a little bit north of $100,000. Tax cuts he's pushing for are for people who are lots richer than that. I do think a Democratic economic policy that includes a middle-class tax cut is a smart thing. But I want to push back a little bit on the sort of factual claim that I heard you make. The other, on inflation, think about what the moves are to lower inflation, because those moves probably include not making it quite as easy for the people actually raising prices to raise those prices, right? Joe Biden didn't raise those prices. Democrats didn't raise those prices, right? So I'd be thinking about what that does in fact mean. I do think that means a right to organize. I do think it makes sure that there are in fact protections for organizing, protections for organized labor. There's other stuff, but I got to get one more caller so they can do speed round before we go, and that's going to be George from Cripple Creek. You got a little bit of time before break. Go ahead. George? All right, Kenyatta, you're the last word before break. Kenyatta, you there? Huh. All right. So I'll dwell more on what is a middle-class focused economic policy for the country. What does trade look like? What do and I heard our callers say, well, it's not about child care because 80% of union members. I want to check that number, that it's not only about children. I do think it's about job training. I do think it's about making sure that there is a path to ownership, not just a path to working. I do think that it is about making sure some of the cost of living elements, including helping to make sure there's sufficient housing supply so housing costs aren't being jacked up. I do think there's some things that are right now.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
That are right now worth promoting. They're already in there, and really interesting, engaging on one of those other planks of the platform that makes sense. We'll be back. And let me say something more. I want to see if we can get to Kenyatta and George, whose call we tried to take. But here's something else. Understand, the Republican Party economic policy right now is not focused on the middle class. It's not even close. And I don't just even mean tax policy. I mean, let's look at antitrust law. Do you really think that growing consolidation of economic power yields more workers and more jobs? Or do you think that what's happening right now is trying to not only privatize activities? I understand if you're a private union member, you're not as worried about you might not be quite as worried about your public union brothers and sisters, but also just mechanizing, just automating that work. You think that the billionaires that lined up with Donald Trump at his inauguration are at all worried that they really want to pay the wages of Teamster delivery drivers and longshore dock workers? You think they really want that? Or you think they'd much rather figure out a way so they don't need that? What is the policy for that, right? I know that there has been a huge propaganda effort to be able to say the Democrats have stepped into a little bit that failed to respond sufficiently. But I don't think most is about that. I think it's those same oligarchs. It's those same plutocrats who are buying the media, controlling social media, making sure that too many middle-class people see a narrow range of messages that include, the Democrats have abandoned us. I think there does have to be a greater commitment and more focus and more noise around middle-class focused economic policy. But don't get it twisted that somehow the Republican Party has become on the side of middle-class folks. That hasn't happened. Look what's happened to wealth disparities over the last 80 years. Look what's happened to wealth disparities ever since Ronald Reagan. They've just bigger gap, and bigger gap. Middle class keeps going away, especially during Republican administrations. We've also seen significant drops in jobs relative to Democrats. Democrats have seen growth in jobs. Republicans have seen stable or loss in jobs. We haven't seen smart middle-class economic growth under Republicans, quite the opposite. So I agree with your general point, but on the specifics, we got some talking to do. Let us go to Mike from Chicago, Illinois. Bring the noise. Might be on your end. Kenyatta, you still can't hear me, huh? All right. So we'll mess with that. We'll mess with that at the break. What I will say is something about what are we going to do during What are we going to do during this joint session? I know that's one of our questions of the day. Is what are we going to do about the joint session? There's the walkout. I've been trying to think as I've been hearing the questions and hearing the ideas and hearing the comments, what might be a creative thing to do. Here's something that I haven't heard. Inviting fired workers and bringing those workers to the joint session to have them there. I think that could be interesting. Another thing that could be interesting, is there a visual way? So I heard like yelling out, "You lie," and I heard the flip out thing. Is there a way to mark and visually mark the number of lies, the number of mistruths in a way that'll look good on TV? Maybe "You lie" looks good on TV, but is there another way to do that? Is there something to hold up? Is there a counter? Is there a digital counter? I want to get creative about that. Your call's next.
Hey, thanks so much for sharing our program and for reaching out to our stations and sponsors and letting them know that you're listening. It really means a lot to us. It's the great revenge. Trump's Orwellian America is taking shape. The key to it was this insane executive order titled Ending the Weaponization of the Federal Government. And basically what it does is it sets up the weaponization of the federal government. It proclaims that the Biden administration was, using the Justice Department to go after Trump people and Republicans, and it does it in a way that basically rationalizes they're doing the same thing. This is a absolute danger to our republic. This executive order and Trump's assertions around it, and you can read all about it. There's a whole op-ed about it, titled "The Great Revenge, Trump's Orwellian America Takes Shape," over at HartmannReport.com. Get ready for the investigations, the arrests, and the show trials. HartmannReport.com. Check it out.
George, I hope you are on the air.
Yeah, how you doing, Jeff?
I'm good. Good to hear your voice.
Well, this is a proposal I've heard batted about for aid for Ukraine. There are about $300 billion of sequestered Russian assets, mainly in Europe, and the proposal is liquidate those and use that $300 billion to fund aid to Ukraine. That would be a big pot and wouldn't cost us and the Europeans an extra penny.
Yeah, no, I hear you, and I will say to for anybody who thinks that the stopping aid to Ukraine has anything to do with money, look only now. And for those people who were concerned about Joe Biden relative to what was happening in Israel, look what just happened with the billions of dollars that were funded to Israel, emergency funds. I think $4 billion sent to Israel right after Israel canceled its agreement to do its next ratchet down on a pathway to peace. I want to get to Kenyatta before we go to break. George, thank you so much. Kenyatta, you're on the air.
Hey, Jefferson. Something I haven't heard anyone speak about after Friday is at one point, right about 40, the whole thing lasted about 49 minutes. I watched it from start to finish. Right about 44 minutes in, when it started to really go downhill, there's a certain point where Trump actually strikes Zelensky. He takes his right hand and he actually backhands him in the chest. Do you think that Donald Trump would have done that to President Xi, one of the Saudi royals, or Vladimir Putin?
He wouldn't even do it to Eminem.
No, really, man. And here's this guy. He's being a tough guy. Mr. 5 deferments from the Vietnam War. How do you get 5 deferments, coward? and he's going to be a tough guy with this little fella, Zelensky. Now, politics out of it, how I feel about Ukraine, you know, that was just amazing. Let me tell you something about bullies, Jefferson. I've dealt with them my whole life, and there's one way to deal with them, and they've got to be smashed in the mouth. And until the American public realizes this guy's going to keep steamrolling this country.
Good call, Kenyatta. Yeah, Donald Trump is a bully, and he's bad. Thanks so much for the call. Thanks so much for your wisdom and being part of this community. We'll be right back after this.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
In addition to bringing you the Thom Hartmann Program here on Free Speech TV and Video Media Online, we also have a whole set of ways you can interact with us and tools you can use to spread the word about the importance of democracy and the threats to it in our republic. First, there's your daily homework. Sue Nethercutt puts together a daily email newsletter that has a link to every story I discuss on the air, so you can find my sources and you can share them with your friends. It's free and you can sign up at thomhartmann.com. Second, I publish my daily take every day over at the hartmannreport.com website. That's also free if you want the daily 5 days a week rant in your inbox. No ads either. Third, we have the podcasts. There's the free 1-hour version of our daily show that's advertising supported. You can find that wherever you get your podcasts normally. And then there's also the podcast of the entire 3-hour show with no advertisements, and that's available by subscription over at thomhartmann.com. So check them all out at thomhartmann.com and hartmannreport.com.
We say fight back!
Promises, Lies, and Corruption, My Battle with Donald Trump's Fake University by Art Cohen with Dan Good. This is from Chapter 1, The Art and the Deal. I was in a vulnerable place. I found myself jobless in early 2009 after my consumer electronics company went through a forced sale. I'd poured my life into Ariel Inc. You might remember our AudioBug FM transmitters, ladybug-shaped devices that aired music from portable devices over a car radio. After Apple's iPod became all the rage, we developed, manufactured, and licensed products for major retailers and brands such as Best Buy's Dynex, Iriver, Kensington, SanDisk, XM Radio, and Delphi. Later, we looked to expand our wireless music transmission offerings with our own i21 brand, working seamlessly with the debut in 2007 of a new iPhone. Everything was going well until it wasn't. The consumer electronics industry was hit hard by the 2008 recession. Our major investor wanted to restructure the company and install new management. I was out as CEO in 2009. I wanted to find something new and fast. It wasn't a great time to be unemployed. The national economy was tanking, and to top it off, Silicon Valley isn't a cheap place to live. I worried about providing for my wife and 2 sons. At age 44, I found myself at a crossroads, an inflection point in my career. After spending 5 years as a CEO, I wanted to do something different and carve a new path. And then I came across a special invitation in the mail and a full-page ad in the San Jose Mercury News promoting an opportunity. Do you think you can profit in this market? You can, and I'll show you how, proclaimed the advertiser's headline underneath a photo of real estate developer Donald Trump. The ad promised the opportunity to learn from Donald Trump's hand-picked experts. He's the most celebrated entrepreneur on earth. He's earned more in a day than most people do in a lifetime. He's living a life many men and women only dream about, and now he's ready to share with Americans like you the Trump process for investing in today's once-in-a-lifetime real estate market. Come to this free introductory class, and you'll learn from Donald Trump's hand-picked instructors
a systematic method for investing in real estate that anyone can use effectively. You'll learn foreclosure investing from the inside out. You'll learn how to finance your deals using other people's money. You'll learn how to overcome your fear of getting started. End quote. The ad featured a guarantee attributed to the man himself. I can turn anyone into a successful real estate investor, including you. So, why not me? Donald Trump was a name I trusted. I grew up in Philadelphia, less than 100 miles from New York City, so I was familiar with his success as a real estate developer and as an author of the 1987 bestseller, The Art of the Deal. I'd made the hour-long drive to Atlantic City, New Jersey a couple times, and his last name was splashed across the casinos, T-R-U-M-P, and flashing lights. I consider the name Trump synonymous with success and wealth. At least that's what it meant for me back then. During the mid-'80s, while a student at Drexel University, I was one of the co-founding members of the D-Users, widely acknowledged as the first Macintosh users group. I was invited to a Hollywood-style event called Going National, hosted by Drexel on its campus. There, I met the legendary Steve Jobs, co-founder of Apple. His inspiring talk that day imagined future computers using artificial intelligence to have conversations with the dead. Not literally, but using inputs known about, for example, Abraham Lincoln. The AI would bring Lincoln to life so you could have a modern-day conversation with him as if he were alive today. Jobs' talk inspired me to lead a team tasked during a competition with imagining the personal computer of the year 2000. There we were, to present our vision with an impressive panel. Science fiction writer Ray Bradbury, futurist Alvin Toffler, education writer and historian Diane Ravitch, computer pioneer Alan Kay, and Apple co-founder Steve Wozniak. A team from the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign won the competition. They envisioned a tablet device that sounded an awful lot like the eventual iPad. During a luncheon, I got to sit at a table with Bradbury, and we began talking. He was amiable. He told me how his writing career didn't take off right away. He kept at it, day by day, year by year, and eventually success and fame found him. I love science fiction, and Fahrenheit 451 is one of my favorite books. Besides my father, Bradbury probably inspired me more than anyone else as a writer, something I enjoy doing in my spare time. The Project 2000 contest was beneficial in another way. It allowed me to connect with Apple employees and give them my resume. By 1989, I was moving to California as an Apple employee. I worked as an engineer at Apple until the mid-'90s, during the time before Steve Jobs returned to the company. I left to join a company called General Magic, where I worked on product and project management. During my time there, I bumped into a French-born computer programmer who said his wife came up with an idea about selling stuff from around the house online. Everybody laughed about it. I guess Pierre Omidyar got the last laugh. His creation, Auction Web, was later renamed eBay and became one of the world's leading e-commerce companies. I bounced around several tech companies in Silicon Valley, including Coraco, Oracle, and Philips Semiconductors. At one point, I tried my hand at law school, taking classes at night. Philips was picking up the tab. Classes were challenging and my head wasn't in it. It was a big commitment and I ended up only going for a year. My passion remained with high tech. After moving to California, I didn't keep close tabs on Donald Trump. I wasn't aware of his casino empire cratering or his massive, massive debt. The book is Trump U by Art Cohen with Dan Good.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back to your live democracy planning meeting. Your discussion session for a movement for a better world in real time. The topic has come up. How should we resist? What should we do? Not only the policy proposal that matters nationally, not only what might we do, what's the smartest protest? Somebody asked, we much appreciated a caller who was going and protesting. Many people are saying we've got to protest day and night. Maybe if it's cold at night, maybe just do day. But what would be a sign that would be broad-based? And I said earlier in the show that I would offer my strategic thought about where I think the smartest areas are for energy. The smartest place is, I think, where you can find energy. That's my maybe not that surprising answer. Have a bias for action. If you find something that's moving you, find a way to move on the thing that's moving you. Even if it's not the perfect thing. Because there's so much work to do. It is a target-rich environment. It's hard to get it wrong. Don't be paralyzed by your need to analyze. Act. Write, call, give, help, support, whatever you need to do. Whatever you can do, where you find energy. That's the most important answer. But if there's lots of areas and you're trying to think of, you have a storehouse of energy, you're willing to apply it to lots of different places, or you want to find where you might find some energy. I do like the message they came up with in a Strategy Corner micro consulting session during our live planning meeting today. I know it may seem like a radio and TV show. I am saying it's a planning meeting for the future of the world, the future of America, future of democracy, future of a movement that will try to make a better world, a better country, a better democracy. And so he said, what should my sign say? It would be a cross-cutting message. And I wasn't sure and worked through it. I'm a verbal processor. And what I came up with was tearing down America is bad for you. Tearing down America, I think, is what I'd call this. I think that's what Trump is doing. I think that's what Elon Musk is doing. I think that's what Vladimir Putin is doing. I think that's what they want to do by making us get bird flu. I think that's what they want to do by making our skies less safe. I think that's what they want to do by making our country less safe. I think that's what they want to do by alienating us from our most important European allies. I think that's what they want to do by undermining the United States dollar as a global reserve currency. Tear down America. Government cuts, firing. It was never about efficiency. It also wasn't about firing. It's about tearing down America. And it's not just that tearing down America exists. It's also that it's bad. And it's not just that it's bad, and it's bad for you. So I would emphasize that. I think that is a dominant message. It was a pretty good, focused message. If we're talking about Trump, I already gave you that one. Trump is bad, and he's bad for you. Musk is bad, and he's bad for you. Bad people with bad motives, doing bad things with bad results, with bad friends. It's bad, and it's bad for you. Tearing down America is bad, and tearing down America is bad for you. So I do think those things. But that's not what I was teasing earlier on. I said, where would I apply energy? So that I don't bury the lead, as is my wont to do, here's what I would say. Go long and go local. Go long and go local. That doesn't mean don't protest Trump. You got energy for that? Go ahead. That doesn't mean don't work at a congressional race. You got energy, ability to that? Go ahead. It's 4 years before a presidential race. I want to have focus on not just that. Because I think about women's suffrage. And that didn't happen in Congress. It's an example I almost always go to most quickly. That we are not going to persuade Donald Trump. We're not going to persuade Project 2025. We're not going to persuade Rage. We're not going to persuade Doge. We're not going to persuade the various Confederates who want to tear down America, who have found inspiration from economic messages deriving from the worst elements of the pre-Civil War Deep South and then the post-Civil War and post-Civil Rights Movement Deep South. My site is Democracy in Chains. If you haven't read it, you should, or at least read the summary. That I think we have a siege that has been decades in the making, and we have to be prepared to work for decades into the future. That doesn't mean waiting for a decade. It means starting right now, but where to start? That to pass women's suffrage, it meant it had to happen state by state. In my state, it took 5 times. 5 times they had to go to the voters and try to honor a woman's right to vote. Finally, on the 5th time. The 3rd time wasn't the charm. Either was the 4th. State by state, city by city. What can you do? Where are the points of leverage? Where's a media organization you can turn? Where's a show that you might be able to help boost its listenership? I've got an idea. How about this one? What's an institution that needs a little bit of support? How do we rebuild and build civil society? What's a company that should understand that it is not free to support oligarchy and tyranny? How can we leverage that? Think about the places that are leverageable. Think about the places that deserve your laser beam. Be strategic and thoughtful. Be intentional, not slow. And I do think that means consider, because Trump dominates so much of the freaking attention of the country. It's like, it's his superpower. He says crazy stuff and does crazy stuff, does bad stuff. He doesn't mind back because it gives him more attention. So don't only fall for that trap. Got to respond sometimes, obviously, but don't only fall for that trap. Also think not just immediate term reaction, but think long. What do we need the world to be? How do we need to build? This fire didn't start in 2024. The Powell memo wasn't written in 2016. The Heritage Foundation wasn't given birth to in this new millennium. It has been decades in the building, this effort to tear down America. And if we're going to build it back, we're not going to rebuild America in a day. We're going to have a long-term commitment. So that's when I say think long. I also said think local. It's my women's suffrage example, but you can go local than that. What can you do? State-based pro-democracy coalitions, even city-based pro-democracy coalitions. I'm thinking of my friends in Mississippi right now. How awesome it is to start a little group. It could be a book club. It could be a pro-democracy coalition. You can work on money in politics. You can work to lower the giving limits in your city council, county commission, state legislative races. You can work for voter access. You can work for better voting systems. You can work for proportional representation in certain places so they can't just use partisan politics and then anti-democratic talking points to build their not even majority movement and power structure. You can win legislatures. If I had a magic wand, it'd be that. That's who's given us the districts. That's who's given us these gerrymandered rules. When you have states that are 51-49 and they have legislatures that are as if they were 65-35. Follow the lead of what Michigan did to get redistricting reform in a purple state. In blue states, don't just do it one-sided. That should be federal. You're taking the bait if you do it in blue states. That'll just give them more red congressional seats. Win legislatures. Massive voter registration. Make sure people's IDs are lined up. Make sure people do know the polling place they need to go to. Youth voter education and civic training. Sortition, citizen juries. Public financing in cities. We could get, right now, there are 20 cities in this country that could pass publicly financed elections, which would mean you'd start building up trained activists, start building up people who are used to their campaigns, start building up new elected officials, maybe new future members of Congress. And why do I care about that? Because these would be people, if they ran public, if they ran with public financing, selling out to big donors wouldn't be their first move. It means they would start to build a power structure that wasn't only reliant upon the status quo power structure. It means that their early talking points, their early commitments, their early conception of themselves, their early staff's conception of what they were trying to do wasn't only trying to aim at the center of the corporate lobby in Washington, D.C. Because the center of the corporate lobby in Washington, D.C. is not the center of America. And it's not the center of people's lives. It's not the center of any poll, and it's not the center of the answer. We've got to recreate a more genuine center. And publicly financed elections in local areas, in cities. And by the way, it also saves resources because you got Democrats fighting over those races, spending money on those races, run them public. Citizen jury, as I said, participatory budgeting as an example of citizen juries, giving people real power of democracy, not just giving more power to politicians, not just being part of this fight that is trumped up, pun intended, in significant part to make it so you aren't actually in charge of your country or your city or your county or your state. Get actually in charge. Give yourself actually, but not to become a dictator, but be part of the conversation in a meaningful way. Work on community land trusts. I'll start with public banks. We could have cities right now. Sometimes you need enabling legislation. Sometimes you're not preempted in your state. Look if you'd have a rule. Get a group together, start passing to be able to have a local bank, a public bank, so that when you're investing in your local community, all that money is not sucking off to Wall Street. It's circulating in your local community. You can invest in projects that make sense for your community. Community land trust, which I said but didn't explain. In my town, we've had building going on for a while. And almost all those cranes that I see, those aren't funded by local money. They're funded by New York money or international money. And when there's money paid to them, that money goes straight away. It just leaves. There's some that goes around. There's some builders who get to build on that. That's good. There's some plumbers and pipe fitters. That's good. But then it's built and they're gone. They have to find another gig, and the money that got sucked in gets sucked out. Community land trust build a system so people in the community can invest in the new buildings. And you're investing in your local community, that can grow wealth in the local community. Look up community land trust. A new method and new methods for community safety. Check out street response. Portland Street Response as an example. Think about, right now, we have police departments and fire departments. Thank you to both of those. But right now, most calls to 911 are not asking for either a fire hose or a gun. We need new models of community safety. Keep our streets safe, including traffic safety. Keep our streets safe. Real ways to improve government. Real ways to improve people's lives. We'll be right back. Focus on that. Go long, go local.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
I know I'm one of the few people who does a national rant about local stuff, but we have to change the country, not only get mad at a president. Jeremiah from Coalport, Pennsylvania, you are on the air.
Hey, Jefferson. In the wake of this Zelensky-Trump row, there's been some misinformation that's been floating around on social media. And, like, one of the things is coming from these abandoned Biden progressives who think that Israel's the only important issue, and they think Biden's a war criminal. It's saying something about how after Russia invaded, Ukraine and Russia had a peace agreement, but Biden told them not to sign it. Is this like a complete fabrication, or is it taking something out of context?
Wait. There was a peace. You're saying there was a peace agreement, and Biden told them not to sign that peace agreement?
Yeah, that's what.
Yeah, no. If somebody's got chapter and verse on the particular misstatement, I'll take a look at it. It is absolutely true that anybody worried about peace in Ukraine, anybody who's worried about Ukraine not getting bullied, oppressed, and taken over, would advise them not just to have a ceasefire without a security agreement. Would say, don't just say you're going to stop fighting and then wait for Russia to start fighting some more and encroach further. This is literally the same lesson that we learned prior to World War II. When there'd be encroachments on Poland, say, Germany would say, and I'm trying not to say Hitler, but I guess I just did, when Germany said, we won't go further, and they'd get further. Won't go further, but they went further. Putin has violated so many agreements, including prisoner swap agreements, that you can't just take them at their word. If you could, it's like somebody steals stuff out of your house, and they say, you keep your door unlocked, we won't come back and steal. Don't call the police. Don't protect yourself from us coming back and stealing stuff in your house. Just let's call it a peace agreement. Let's call it a ceasefire and leave your door unlocked. They'll just come and steal more stuff, or they'll come and stay. No, it's what we've seen with social media, international policy discussions, and I even call it that, is that social media is so infiltrated by bot rooms. So it's why I value what you guys do, what you wonderful people do participating in this live meeting. I know I just called it a live meeting. It's because you had to call me, you had to actually use your real voice and say a name, I think probably your real name, where you call comes up. Like, we can have great trust that I'm a real person talking to a real person. You believe what you think, I believe what I think, and we have an honest to goodness conversation. The challenge we have in social media is so much of that stuff is just rigged. It's just trumped up. It's just fake. It's just, there's literally, we've seen them. There's just rooms of people who operate 700 phones on their own. So if you have 10 of them, you can be 7,000 profiles. You can impact every frickin' conversation you want to on used to be Twitter. Every frickin' conversation you want to on Facebook. And you can drive these things. And we know, I interviewed on Democracy Nerd, and 100 episodes of this, people can check it out. I interviewed an misinformation. This gave shivers down my spine. And people should hear this. I was talking to a misinformation and disinformation expert. And I had this idea to combat these, all these trumped up messaging and all of this sort of kind of fake messaging stuff, all these Russian bots, et cetera. And I said, shouldn't we, I had this idea, right? Shouldn't we have a list and say, here are the top 5, top 10, top 3 messages being driven by Russia every day? And he said, that might get flipped. I said, and he talked about it. I said, well, how can I find it? He said, where's the list of the top things pushed on Russia? It is literally the trending topics on Twitter. I'll be right back.
Missed my opening rant today? It's usually published over at HartmannReport.com, where you can read it and share it with your friends for free. Check it out, HartmannReport.com.
So before the break, I was talking about how we need to both expand and narrow our focus. Got to think longer and think local. That's not to say don't care about what's happening in the joint session, don't care what's happening in the presidency. We got to care. But that takes so much time, so much energy, so much attention. Make sure it doesn't take 90% of your energy and attention. Make sure it doesn't take even 75%. Try to get it to like half, maybe even a little bit less. Most effective I ever was when I realized that I wasn't going to be able to change who the president of the United States was, and I wasn't going to, it was after 9/11, and the then President George W. Bush got up and said the most important thing we were supposed to do was shop. And I don't argue that we shouldn't have made sure there was economic activity after 9/11. I just knew that wasn't the only thing we needed to do. That we actually needed to do was call people to service. And I realized that what had happened to the once proud Republican Party was that it had just decided that public service somehow, with very narrow exceptions, was worthy of derision. That the idea of contributing to something greater than yourself was to be set aside, and instead people should just worship an altar of money and of a false understanding of a God that thinks that's actually what you should pray to.
2 minutes.
And I realized, no, we've got to do more than that. And the most effective I was is saying, listen, I'm not going to be able to stop that invasion. I'm not going to be able to change George W. Bush's mind, but what I can do is I can impact my own state. And we organized a bunch of people my age, some younger, some older. I was pretty young then, better looking. And we bought a bus. And we took that bus to every swing legislative district in the state. And we knocked on doors. And we knocked on between 50,000 and 70,000 doors back in 2002. And then we did it again in 2004. And that helped Jeff Merkley be named the House Majority Leader instead of just House Democratic Leader. And that put him in a position to run for the U.S. Senate and beat Gordon Smith. And now Jeff Merkley's one of the finest members of the U.S. Senate we've had in a long, long time. But not only that, it started moving, or people don't think about this, but before that, for 17 years, I think it was, Oregon had been a double-barreled Republican legislature. And finally, and now we've had Democratic legislature. We worked on that in 2002, 2004, 2006, 2008, until we finally did. We started in the Senate, then did in the House. When I started putting my energy on what I could impact in my state, in my town, I had the most impact I ever had. So look at that. I'll get more to what's happening in Ukraine, but I want to make sure people are hearing me about go long and go local. Let me say something about Jeremiah's call. Jeremiah called and asked about messaging. Let me finish this quick story. Jeremiah called and asked about messaging and said, oh, Biden killed the peace deal. So much of what you're seeing on social media is just false or trumped up or manipulated. I asked this disinformation expert, I said, what's the best way I can track what disinformation experts are pushing? He said, oh, just look at the trending topics on Twitter. That is the list. We'll be back.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
202-808-9925.
Club is Ezra Klein's new book, Why We're Polarized. This is from the introduction, and it's a couple pages into it. I'm starting out here. I have found that American politics is best understood by braiding two forms of knowledge that are often left separate: the direct on-the-ground insights shared by politicians, activists, government officials, and other subjects of my reporting, and the more systemic analyses conducted by political scientists, sociologists, historians, and others with the time, methods, and expertise to study American politics at scale. On their own, political actors often ignore the incentives shaping their decisions, and academic researchers miss the human motivations that drive political decision-making. Together, however, they shine bright light on how and why American politics works the way it does. There's much awry in American politics, and I won't in this book attempt to catalog all of it. But I've come to believe the master story, the one that drives almost all divides and most fundamentally shapes the behavior of participants, is the logic of polarization. That logic, put simply, is this: to appeal to a more polarized public, political institutions and political actors behave in more polarized ways. As political institutions and actors become more polarized, they further polarize the public. This sets off a feedback cycle. To appeal to a yet more polarized public, institutions must polarize further. When faced with yet more polarized institutions, the public polarizes further, and so on. Understanding that we exist in relationship with our political institutions, that they are changed by us and we are changed by them, is the key to this story. We don't just use politics for our own ends. Politics uses us for its own ends. There are many different types of polarization possible, and I'll discuss some of them later in the book, but the locus of polarization I'll discuss is on political identity. And that requires saying a few words about a term that should be very useful in American politics, but that has become almost useless: identity politics. A core argument of this book is that everyone engaged in American politics is engaged in identity politics. This is not an insult, and it's not controversial. We form and fold identities constantly, naturally. Identity is present in politics in the way gravity, evolution, or cognition is present in politics. That is to say, it is omnipresent in politics because it is omnipresent in us. There is no way to read the literature on how humans form and protect their personal and group identities, literature I will survey in this book, and believe that any of us is immune. It runs so deep in our psyches, so activated so easily by even weak cues and distant threats, that it is impossible to speak seriously about how we engage with one another without discussing how our identities shape that engagement. Unfortunately, the term identity politics has been weaponized. It is most often used by speakers to describe politics as practiced by members of historically marginalized groups. If you're black and you're worried about police brutality, that's identity politics. If you're a woman and you're worried about the male-female pay gap, that's identity politics. But if you're a rural gun owner decrying universal background checks as tyranny, or a billionaire CEO complaining that high tax rates demonize success, or a Christian insisting on nativity scenes in public squares, well, that's just good old-fashioned politics. With a quick sleight of hand, identity becomes something that only marginalized groups have. The term identity politics in this usage obscures rather than illuminates. It's used to diminish and discredit the concerns of weaker groups by making them look self-interested. Special pleading in order to clear the agenda for the concerns of stronger groups, which are framed as more rational, proper topics for normal political debate. But in wielding identity as a blade, we have lost it as a lens, blinding ourselves in a bid for political advantage. We're left searching in vain for what we refuse to allow ourselves to see. All politics is influenced by identity. Those identities are most powerful when they are so pervasive as to be either invisible or uncontroversial. American is an identity. So too is Christian. When politicians, including the irreligious, end speeches with "God bless America," it's not because they're making an appeal to a higher power, but because they're making an appeal to our bedrock identities. If you don't believe me, ask yourself why there are so few open atheists or even agnostics in national politics. This does not mean that politics is an equation solved by locating identity. Identity shapes our worldview, but it does not mechanistically decide it. And while we often speak of identity as a singular, it is always a dizzying plural. We have countless identities, some of them in active conflict with each other, others lying dormant until activated by threat. Much that happens in political campaigns is best understood as a struggle over which identities voters will inhabit come election day. Will they feel like workers exploited by their bosses, or heartlanders dismissed by coastal elites? Will they vote as patriotic traditionalists offended by NFL players who kneel during the national anthem, or as parents worried about the climate their children will inhabit? What we are often fighting over in American politics is group identity and status. Fights that express themselves in debates over policy and power, but cannot be truly reconciled by either. Health policy is positive sum, but identity conflict is zero sum. The book Why We're Polarized by Ezra Klein.
Support progressive radio. If you're listening to us on a commercial station, call their advertisers and let them know you're listening. If you're listening to us on Pacifica, or one of our many nonprofit stations, please support them when they do their fundraising drives. Thanks for supporting Progressive Talk Radio, and tag you're it. Donald Trump lost, voter suppression won in 2024. That's the headline over at HartmannReport.com, and just a brilliant article written by Greg Palast exclusively for the Hartmann Report. He writes, Trump lost. That is, if all legal voters were allowed to vote, if all legal ballots were counted, Trump would have lost the states of Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Georgia. Vice President Kamala Harris would have won the presidency with 286 electoral votes. And if not for the mass purge of voters of color, if not for the mass disqualification of provisional and mail-in ballots, if not for the new mass vigilante challenges in swing states, Harris would have gained at least another 3.5 million votes, topping Trump's popular vote tally by 1.2 million. Greg brings us the numbers. He lays it out. You can read it over at HartmannReport.com, absolutely free. It's titled Trump Lost, Vote Suppression Won at HartmannReport.com. Check it out.
And we're back. So, to continue, where can we best apply our energy, and how do we deal with the current media? And what I want to say is not only respond, but also be proactive. Not only say, Trump did this, and therefore let him pick the fight and react, but also you pick the fight you think we need to have. You pick the thing we need to focus on. And yeah, to all those bots out there who have been trying to pivot attention from what's happening in Ukraine to other things, including the Middle East. Not the Middle East isn't important, but that was a strategy. That was a tactic. That was an effort to take away attention from the biggest bully country. If it's not Trump, it's Putin, biggest bully country, and what they're doing in Ukraine. And that includes all kinds of misinformation, disinformation. Don't take the bait. Let's do speed round for your calls. Let's go to Carl from Arcadia, Oklahoma, who wins the Most Patient Listener Award. Carl, you are on the air.
Hello, Jeff. How you doing?
Good.
Hey, listen, I got a one-liner to put on your check when you write it to the Democrats, and it's take the gloves off. Just write down where in your notation, take the gloves off.
And what does that mean? If they don't have gloves, Carl, what are they doing? What are they doing with their gloveless hands?
In other words, I'm a combat vet from Vietnam in 1969, and I've probably been on 100 firefights. And I know until you get tough, the tough get going. People say that.
Yeah.
That's what I mean. They got to stop playing footsies with them, so to speak, and start really getting down to the barrel with them, because they're not going to, like the man said earlier, until you hit a man in the mouth and he bleed, he's not going to believe you. And so that's what the Democrats got to do.
I hear you, and I agree that decorum is not like for its own sake. That fear for its own sake, like none of these are helpful strategies. But as you think about it, when you say, well, once they have their gloves off, once they want to punch somebody in the mouth, whatever it is, what are they doing? What's that thing?
That's the action. That's that action when you say take them gloves off.
I hear that.
You know, anytime you dealing with gloves, you just dealing with kid gloves, it's clean or whatever.
Yeah.
But sometimes you have to get dirty.
Yeah.
And so that's what I'm saying.
All right.
And it's just like I'm saying I'm a vet, and so I'm looking at this.
Yeah.
The man done told the Navy and she struck the Navy lady off.
Yeah.
He struck the Army people off.
Yeah.
Now, in combat, you don't put no whole new nobody, and you've been there, done that. You don't throw all them off. If you do, you open yourself up for attack.
All right, so I'll give you one, Carl. I'll give you one, and this is one I would actually do. I'd urge you to do this one. That one thing that would be outside the norm, that would be a version of taking the gloves off, would be urging retired generals who know what, and this could be members of the military, encouraging them to do it, finding whatever communication routes you can find. Veterans doing this, asking veterans to communicate to retired generals. Retired generals are even worse than retired presidents, and in some respects even better. What I mean is there is this norm, there is this habit of retired generals not criticizing a president in office. And that meant, for instance, the generals that knew Donald Trump was on his way to being a fascist, that they would say that to like a reporter, but they wouldn't get on camera.
Well, you know they did. You know they did, about 100 of them. They really did. Listen,
but hear me out, Carl. Hear me out.
I'm listening. Okay, I'm listening.
Hear me out. So I remember when they had his old chief of staff, right, who was willing to say something to a reporter, but then didn't get on camera, didn't do interviews, didn't get on Fox News. So urging members of the military to be more vocal, including really high-profile former Republican appointees, including people who serve for Trump, who know he's doing the wrong stuff, willing to say so. That is the kind of thing that I would say is, to use your term, taking the gloves off. Carl, you get the last word.
Well, listen, I'm going to say this. I'm saying he's getting rid of all these people, these generals, and everybody what they're doing. That's the worst thing you want to do. And then he mentioned the other night, World War III. Last person was talking about war was George Bush.
Yeah. Carl, thank you so much for your service, and thanks for your call.
All right, thank you.
Appreciate it. We're all looking for somebody else to save us. Right? And I don't mean Carl. I mean like all of us. All of us like, blank needs to do blank. Understand, there isn't that person. Unless it's all of those people. My wife is grumpy at Obama. Sorry, Katie, I didn't mean to call you out. But she's like, Obama was my president, right? I didn't just cast a ballot for him. I was a delegate at the National Convention on it for him. And he talked about government efficiency and government improvement in a way that fired me up. Not in the fake tear down America way that Elon Musk is doing it. And I wanted him to not just make TV shows for Netflix, but not just build his library, but help build a national movement, not just for volunteerism, but for pro-democracy action, right? I wanted that to happen. But Obama can't save us. He's not the president. I want Chuck Schumer to do certain things, but he can't save us. He's not the president. He's not the head of the Senate. I want Hakeem Jeffries probably to do some things, but he can't pass a single bill. He can't even force an amendment. right? Like, I want the Supreme Court. I want the courts to say you can't do this. But they've been working on taking over the courts for 40 years. So the thing that we have to come to grips with is it's worse than we think. And I don't mean that to give you despair. I don't mean that to give you fear. I mean that we have to be brutally honest with the critical facts facing our situation, and ultimately confident that democracy can win out, and ultimately confident that America can win. We have to do both things. And being brutally honest with the critical facts lets us know that there isn't somebody out there with the power to say, oh, if they would just act, we'd be okay. We have to build that power. We have to find more levers. We have to think long. Yes, think national, but also think local. All right, let's go speed round so we can get to your very patient, wonderful calls. Mike, sorry, Chicago, on the air.
Yeah, I had an idea as to what the Democrats could do for the joint session. Rather than walking out, and because that the Republicans normally sit on one side and Democrats sit on the other, so the Democrats should just pass out these white cards amongst themselves, and then when Trump starts a speech and says a lie, certain people hold up these white cards that spell out lie. And there you go. You have your optics, and it's a little quiet protest. They don't have to say anything. They just show the placards like you would see at the stadiums when they would hold up these cards and it would spell out things.
I like the idea of having a visual that looks neutral and factual. No, it doesn't mean neutral, but at least looks factual. That tracks, that focuses attention on things that are said that are dishonest. I like the card. I probably like the card more than I like the yelling, right? But so I like that idea. I like that idea, and appreciate your phone call very much. Any other thought that you have that you want to offer before we go to the next caller?
Well, the only negative downside is that their arms may get too tired while we listen up those cards.
Thank you so much for your call. I'm going to have to say this out loud. So this screen went dark. I think it may have been something my knee hit. I plugged it back in, but it's still off, so I can't take another caller. Is he able to put another caller in without me, so I can just take the next caller and just say the name? Give me a caller, and the caller will introduce themselves to me. We'll be back in just a second. We can put on a caller. Can you hear me? All right. So there is this call. I was talking earlier about state-based and local-based activity, about thinking local and thinking long. There were a couple areas I didn't get to in my riff. We can also build better governance systems. Here's a big thing. If we want people to vote pro-democracy, vote progressive, we've got to show that the places that are governed by those folks work. We have a caller on? Hi there, Lori, go ahead. You're on the air. Give us your question.
Hi, Jefferson, Lori from Ocala. If we're going to protest, we can't be ambivalent. I'd like to rephrase the argument. How do we know that Putin is hiring the best people? Trump told us he was hiring the best people, only the best people to benefit Putin and not the American people. Then think about how the Supreme Court has worked to take away our rights, because it's less people power, less democracy, better for people. How come tax cuts go to the wealthiest and not the American people? We want rich oligarchies. We have more power over them if we give them big tax cuts. How come Musk directed Starlink to hurt Ukraine? Once again, it helped Putin. We can do it with the Department of Energy, the Department of Education, Social Security. We can do it with all of them. This is all Putin. Take away Trump, take away Musk, take away all the boogeyman, and let's call it what it is. Okay, we can call them all. Okay, do you like that?
Yeah, and anybody out there, anything you're reading or anybody you're listening to that you think is giving you inspiration or is giving you direction, or anybody that you think is providing pretty good pathways?
Oh, for me personally?
Yeah.
Okay. I really feel I like Chris Murphy. I know he's government. He works for the government, so he's limited. I think the 50.1 is really good. But what I want to do is I want to get a leader to tell us what the leaders want us to do. I want this to be kind of not hierarchical, but kind of pyramid so that we can all get out. We're huge. We have enormous numbers and a huge voice, but nobody is collectively gathering us and saying, okay, Putin is trying to take us over. Let's have this group do this. We don't know how to do that, but we know that there are people that can organize, like Obama. Your wife was right, because Obama was an organizer, and that's what we need. We don't need to say his name. We don't need to hear his name. We need organizers.
Amen. We need organizers. There's an old Wellstoneism, right? Don't get mad, organize. The most important things we need to do is that's even why I'm saying local, because how do you get people to organize? You can organize a protest, and I'm all for it. But once we do it, I even remember when Obama was elected, and there was so much hope in the country. And the right wing used that against Obama and said, you elected Obama, not everything changed. If people had listened to Obama, he would have said, it's not all going to change right away. One of the reasons I want to build long and I want to build local is because I know change doesn't happen in a day. I know that one protest sign matched with 10,000 others can have an impact. Doing that where we actually build power, build infrastructure, organize in local communities can have lasting benefits. We'll be back. This is Tom's show. Amen to you.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
This is Tom's show. We'll be right back with Carol. Carol, you're on the air. Go ahead.
Hey, Jefferson. Okay, we're making our signs for tomorrow at noon, and also the Saturday, the 8th, International Women's March. I'd like to bring up momsrising.org. They got 70% of their candidates elected, so they're getting stuff done.
Wow.
And 5051 has a kind of a weak mission statement, so take a look at that. But anyway, the signage, we're working on our signs, but we feel like the flippable seats, there's Florida 1 and 6, takes back the House on April 1st, and New York 21, 21st District, is sometime in spring. That's the least Stefanik seat. So if we take those three, and I think there's two more, but let's start with those two right now, April 1st, less than a month. If we get those, then we can talk about all these other luxuries, you know?
No, love the focus. Love the plugs, love the focus. Yeah. Carol, thank you so much. You be well. Give me another one. Diane, hello? You're on the air.
Yes. Hello, Jefferson.
Hi there.
Yes, I just suggest to the Democrats that they hold a press conference afterwards and they focus entirely on Musk right now, because I don't believe they're having to twist themselves into pretzels over on Fox News, because I check in to see what they're saying. And you know, if you want to get people mad that are Republicans, start talking about the Social Security, how he said he was, that was the biggest Ponzi scheme in America. And then you'll have more than just progressive older people out there. That's my opinion.
No,
and
go ahead.
They need to focus on, the Democrats need to say, what are my colleagues doing? They're not coming. The president did not come before us and ask about this Musk thing. And they want to buy out people. That's a lie, because they would have to go before Congress and have the money appropriated. Those people will get nothing, zero.
No, Diane, Diane, really, really appreciate the call. That going after the violation of the Constitution, going after the tearing down of America, going after people who were not elected, and this whole time when Trump was saying, I'm not doing Project 25, not doing Project 2025, not doing Project 2025, and now he's doing that and worse. And by him doing it, he's bringing in an unelected dude who's then going to be getting and who gets government contracts, whose wealth was built in significant part by government contracts. I think you're absolutely right, and I appreciate the call.
Thank you.
All right. Who's up next? Let's take the call. Caller, introduce yourself. Nick, you're on the air.
My name is Nick.
Hey, Nick.
My name is Nick from West Virginia.
West Virginia.
My thing is
My name and a red state, and I'm mad about it. But anyway, my 3 things is economic protest. Here's the 3 ways. No buy from big box stores. Buy local if you have to on Fridays. Most people get paid on Fridays. Let's protest the big people. Second thing, no work Monday. Just don't show up. The pocket of the purse. Number 3, what money you do have, put in these 3 elections coming up, even if it's only $5. Economic protest, because if we do anything in the streets and anything gets tore up like Black Lives Matters, Trump's getting the military ready to start martial law, then we're all doomed. So economics is how you get to the rich. Protest them, don't spend with them. And if you do got to spend on Fridays, buy local from a local supermarket or things if you got to go to the grocery store on payday. That's my thing.
Love it, Nick. Love it, Nick. And thanks for keeping the faith out in West Virginia. Keep spreading the word. It used to be that West Virginia is one of the bluest of blue states for year after year. So thank you for your efforts out there. We'll be right back. This is Tom's Show.
Hey, thanks so much for sharing our program and for reaching out to our stations and sponsors and letting them know that you're listening. It really means a lot to us.
Dean, you are on the air.
Yes, Jefferson. One thing for a visual, I got 2 things. One thing for a visual for the Democrats tomorrow is to all dress up as President Zelensky. And the second thing is we should change our greeting now to the classic Russian greeting of comrade. Whenever we greet anybody now, we should say comrade. Kind of perks their ears up a little bit.
Yeah, Comrade Trump. Only bad news is it means friend, right? But I get your meaning. Thanks for the call.
Oh, I didn't mean Trump. I didn't say Comrade Trump. Just comrade.
Just comrade anybody.
Yep.
All right. Thanks for the call. Give me another. Pat, you're on the air.
Yeah, Jefferson, I agree with everything that everybody's been saying. And, yeah, economically is the only way we're going to bring these, what's down. And I'm sorry, but it's time for everybody to take their blinders off. The Democratic Party and the Republican Party has been bought. They're bought by all of these industries. And I'm sick of it. I'm so sick. I don't even have any words.
Yeah.
I'm ready for a new party. I'm ready for a People's Coalition Party, where we can all stand together and we can all go out and protest and we can all put our complaints out there and try and get some of these problems solved.
So where I'd put that, you're gonna be our time for our last caller. Actually, we'll do one more 30 seconds. I'll use that. I'll respond to this with my closing word. So Pat, let me just respond, and thank you so much for the call. Take everything you said, take the last 80% of what you said, and think about how that would apply in your town and in your state. And thanks, Pat, for the call.
I'm in a red state, and they hate me. Hung up on me again.
No, you're still on the air. I'm trying to finish. I'm trying to finish, but are you still there? Okay. So appreciate so much your call. What I would say is we do need a People's Coalition. It does need to be bigger than the Democratic Party. We do need something that reaches supermajority of voters. I don't think that the primary focus for me is on the particular political party. Right? In fact, I just use the vehicle that is the easiest vehicle to get a bunch of wins. But if you work in your local community, if you work at your state level, so many of them are nonpartisan, we can start building the kind of pro-people power that can move upwards. Don't just expect, don't just move into the blue and red argument. We've got to build a bigger and bigger pro-democracy movement in this country. That's where I'll agree. Another day, I'll talk more about specific party politics. For right now, what I want to do is finish by saying thank you. Thank you to everybody who called, being so kind. I'll be with you this week. do think about where you want to point your laser beam. Do think about the big picture. How is this country supposed to stand for freedom and for independence, for things like Ukraine, by the way? How is this country supposed to stand for working people and for democracy? And what are things you can do to point your laser beam to help? What are the points of leverage? Because you are the coalition of benevolently irrational. The coalition of benevolently irrational, good people doing good things for no good reason. You are priceless. Definition of priceless, worth a lot, not for sale. Thanks so much for listening. Thanks so much for being part of this community. We'll be back tomorrow with Tuesday News Day. Be well.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit thomhartmann.com.
In addition to bringing you the Thom Hartmann Program here on Free Speech TV and Video Media Online, we also have a whole set of ways you can interact with us and tools you can use to spread the word about the importance of democracy and the threats to it in our republic. First, there's your daily homework. Sue Nethercutt puts together a daily email newsletter that has a link to every story I discuss on the air, so you can find my sources and you can share them with your friends. It's free and you can sign up at thomhartmann.com. Second, I publish my daily take every day over at the hartmannreport.com website. That's also free if you want the daily 5 days a week rant in your inbox. No ads either. Third, we have the podcasts. There's the free 1-hour version of our daily show that's advertising supported. You can find that wherever you get your podcasts normally. And then there's also the podcast of the entire 3-hour show with no advertisements, and that's available by subscription over at thomhartmann.com. So check them all out at thomhartmann.com and hartmannreport.com.